Thanks, AG. I suppose everybody knows the Auditor General. But thanks once again for coming. Right. Welcome. We're just concluding introductions, so you may as well introduce yourself before we get into the business.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies for being late. It's Member Mente, member of the committee.
Thank you very much. As CEO, we once again would like to welcome you to this engagement, and thank you for making time to respond to the few questions that we had sent to you, and for being here so that we could have a discussion on the issues that we had raised. We had indicated and do want to state once again that KPMG does significant work with state institutions, for which work they get paid with public money. And so when it became that there were these issues around KPMG that created doubts about whether or not the company does its work to the levels and standards expected of it. It was said that Parliament could not be a passive spectator of the unfolding events, and it was therefore important and necessary that this public engagement be made available to you. As I've indicated, we had chosen to invite you rather than to be legalistic, because we believed that it was in your own interest to utilize a public platform like this to engage Parliament and the public, and to reassure them, let me put it that way, that there is still reason for KPMG to engage with the public. As you are aware, on Monday was the last day for annual reports to be submitted to Parliament, and it might as well be so that a number of the work that we in this committee will be engaging with would have been the product of your work. Now the critical question became what becomes our attitude towards that work, and how do we relate to it if there is significant uncertainty or there is anxiety around whether or not it is a kind of work that we can utilize without any hesitation. It is our understanding that an audit firm, but maybe not necessarily limited to an audit firm, provides essentially two things: expertise and trust. You see I don't know whether to call it a slogan of the Auditor General. They say auditing for public trust. So if you have a trust deficit, then you already have a challenge. A trust deficit that also talks to or puts question marks on expertise, then you don't have anything. So it is important that in as much as there may be processes undertaken by professional bodies or regulatory bodies, we as Parliament representing the people of this country do have a responsibility to engage with you publicly and say, talk to us, so that from where we're standing ourselves, we could have a sense of what is happening. So I think the engagement, therefore, happens in that context and should, from your side, be seen as a platform through which to clarify matters, to clarify issues, as openly as possible. The only challenge that we encounter with people who come before us is it's when we start to give responses that are either evasive or just all over, or seeking to present, as Donald Trump's people say, alternative facts. Then we start to have issues there. But ordinarily, we would want to have a constructive engagement to clarify the issues. So I will, comrades, I will hand over to KPMG because we had sent a set of questions to them to talk to us. And I must say that it is a unique situation for us to say, make a presentation, because we don't take presentations in the committee. We're the only ones who know what we want, and you can only respond to what we want through the questions that we pose. But we'll give you the opportunity to talk to us, and only then can we then allow comrades to raise issues in case there are issues. So if that is the understanding, I'll hand over to you, ma'am, to talk to us, and then we can engage thereafter. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you for the opportunity to present to you. As a starting point, we would like to acknowledge the unusual nature of us as a service provider coming into Parliament, and we accepted the invitation because we do agree with you that it is constructive for us to present some facts to you, and we respect Parliament, and we would like to share our values of being a professional services firm that wants to stay objective, that wants to be transparent and engender trust as we service the public sector as well. We also acknowledge the need to serve our clients and manage confidentiality. We have responded to the questions, and we will try as much as possible to answer any additional questions that you may have. I would like to actually start by personally apologizing to the committee for taking your time, valuable time, to have this conversation. As a service provider, it's important to us that our work is trustworthy, and it's important that you can find comfort in that the work that we've done, we're doing to the best of our ability. So I would like to apologize for that. I also would like to put it out, as we are accounting to the public, that it's important for us to acknowledge the mistakes that are made in the course of doing our work. And we have detailed those in the report to yourselves. And we have acknowledged these mistakes. However, it's important to also remember that KPMG is a firm of 3,400 people who go out there every day and do work in various forms across the public sector. These are dedicated people who have served in the main with distinction. And just to say, I've been humbled to come here in front of you as the new CEO of KPMG. I was trying to calculate the number of days. It's been less than 20 days in this role. And in that 20 days, I have committed to finding ways of rebuilding trust into the organization. And I acknowledge as well that KPMG is actually a set of human beings, and human beings make mistakes. As an organization, when we make mistakes, yes, it's disappointing to us that we've fallen short of our own standards, but it's really important that we own up to them and we start correcting. Before we go to the questions, I think it's also important to state that we do believe we have a role to play in the future, and we acknowledge that whilst there has been a lot of conversation in the public space, we also do want to ask to be given a chance to continue to build and rebuild trust. A number of the jobs that we have done for the public sector have been well received. We have worked in the space for a long time, and we would gladly take any additional questions. But just to say as well that the concerns that have been noted in your letter to us, we share as South Africans, and I personally share that and would like to make sure that the firm responds appropriately. With that, I guess the main question that we would need to respond to is, why should SCOPA continue to have confidence in us? It's really, we've tabled it in paragraph 8 on page 7 of our response, if you do have it in front of you, that we work in a highly regulated profession with independent regulators who conduct regular checks and provide external validation to the work that we do. We have operated successfully in this environment for many years, and it is unfortunate that work that constitute a small proportion of what we do has resulted in our trust being challenged. We also provide a training ground for people in the accounting profession and other professions as a professional services firm, and we will continue to do that. We have taken strong action as tabled in our response, and we will continue to take action. I think our biggest lesson is to listen to you, because SCOPA represents our clients, and to respond accordingly to your suggestions. So just to reiterate that it is unfortunate that we're coming here today to report to you in this way. However, we'll be happy to cover the questions themselves. Chair, I'm not sure if you would like me to cover each one of them at this point. Okay. Thank you. I will be asking my team as well to assist with the questions. So if I lead you to page 4, to the first question that you asked to us about the quantum of contracts with state and constitutional institutions for the past 3 years. I'm going to ask Modise, our Head of Public Service, to answer that.
Thank you, CEO, and thank you, Chair, again. Chair, in response to the question, we've made a submission that details the actual work that we've done with the state in the past 3 years. You would notice that in the table in question for 2015 specifically, we billed the state an amount of about 579 million rounded. In the 2016 year, we had about 485 million, and in the 2017, we had 456. The next question that we had was around the number of contracts themselves. In this regard, particularly around 2017, we had active contracts with organs of state in the region of about 222. In our response, we have not stated that number merely because the billing process and the transacting process with the state is determined on a mandate basis, is determined on a project basis, and in that regard, we've given the numbers in question. Suffice to say that for the 2017 financial year, which is the KPMG financial year, we had in excess of about 1,300 mandates that we were executing on in delivery of work we've secured with the state. Can I hand over back to you?
Thank you, Modise. Chair, we will go through all of them. If there are no questions, we can take them at the end.
We'll take questions after you're done with your presentation.
Thank you. Then the next question is still on page 4. It's around appointing personnel to projects, our client interaction, and preparation of reports and handover to clients. So I'm just going to introduce part of the concepts and we'll ask Gary to add commentary. At any point in time, we engage in a variety of projects, and these will range from tax-related projects to advisory to audit projects. And when we look at the type of work that we've done for our public institutions, they have ranged along those lines. The typical project will be led by an engagement partner, which is one of our senior people. And together with the engagement partner or the business unit, they will be able to allocate personnel. The choices around personnel are mainly based on the skill that's required by the job, and the engagement team usually will be tested for the necessary qualifications as well as skills. We also spend a lot of time ensuring that our professionals have continuous development as well to make sure they can service our clients. We sometimes procure services from specialists, and sometimes not in the employ of KPMG South Africa, depending on what the work request is. And the engagement partner is responsible for communicating any feedback, any discussions around the project, or any detail directly with the client. And they are responsible for communicating directly with the client at all times, although the team members will be able to also communicate with the client from time to time. We are generally guided by our contracts. I think this is important to mention, that we will have different terms of reference from time to time, and our deliverables are based on what is agreed in our contracts. Just looking at these points, I don't know if it will be helpful to go through all of them, but I'll hand over to Gary to raise any additional issues around that.
Sure. You know, the terms of our engagement are governed by our engagement letters, and typically the engagement partner, you know, is responsible for the quality of all deliverables, which include ensuring that all deliverables are consistent with the terms of the engagement letter. He is responsible, or she is responsible, for reviewing and approving significant deliverables prior to their delivery to the client, and preparing deliverables that are in accordance with KPMG's policies, procedures, professional standards, and legal and regulatory requirements. Where engagements are allocated or considered to be high risk, our policies require the appointment of a second reviewing partner who is required to review the final deliverable and to consult on any significant or high risk issues. Typically, engagement deliverables are usually restricted to clients and any other parties specifically identified in our engagement terms, and these are subject to caveats and other restrictions as relevant in the circumstances.
Okay, then if we go to the next question, that's on page 6. KPMG South Africa's understanding of the practical legal implication of declaring a report final and handing it over to clients. So the issuing of reports, whether in draft or final form, is regulated by client requests on specific contracts. The value and significance of a report, whether in draft or final form, differs from case to case depending on the type of service being offered. In some cases, the value of the work lies in the production of the final report. In others, the value of the work lies in the services themselves, with a report merely standing as a summary or description of the work performed. This is an important differential to understand, because in the area of forensic services, the question whether KPMG South Africa will produce a report, whether in draft or final form, or any particular piece of work, depends on what has been agreed with the client, and will be subject to specific client requests according to the provisions of the terms of engagement. KPMG South Africa places a duty on all engagement leaders to employ skill and diligence in reviewing the work product before it's delivered to our clients. It is the duty of the engagement partner to ensure the quality, as already mentioned by Gary. Now, work from time to time is selected as part of our quality performance reviews, and the final work product is reviewed together with the working papers. This is usually done by a separate partner who has not been involved in the work. This form of review can also be done by our international colleagues to ensure that standards have been met. If for any reason we receive information suggesting the work that has been done for clients does not meet standards, we will consider the information and, if appropriate, deal with it by way of review of the work performed. It's important to mention that in the case of the SARS report, a KPMG international investigation assessed whether the engagement team in performing the work did so in accordance with our methodologies, our standards, processes, and procedures, and whether the work that was performed was in compliance with our risk management protocols. This investigation did not involve doing the underlying work, so we were looking at standards, processes, procedures. They did not redo the underlying work. Whenever it does come to our attention that our work has fallen short, we seek to correct it. It is important that this view is communicated to the client, and it may, depending on the circumstances, be necessary to communicate it to others. In this case, given the failure to appropriately apply our own risk management and quality controls, KPMG South Africa decided that part of the report, which refers to conclusions, recommendations, and legal opinions, should no longer be relied upon. This was communicated in the public statement on 15 September 2017. With respect to communications to SARS, we informed SARS of our conclusion and intention to make the statement on the 15th of September 2017 in advance of making the actual public statement. Given the urgency with which we felt we needed to act following the international investigation, it was not possible for us to provide SARS with more time to consider the practical implications of this, if any. We have offered to engage with SARS and remain available to do so.
All right, I think the next question relates to how KPMG South Africa bills its clients, which are billed in terms of the agreed engagement letters and contracts with clients, which is largely, the timing of the invoice is largely determined by the nature of the project or work to be done. When dealing with short-term or less complex projects, invoices are presented on a milestone basis, and when specific deliverables are handed over to the client. With longer-term projects or more complex projects, that's subject to specific terms agreed with our clients, which are typically on a monthly basis or at other appropriate intervals.
Okay.
Thank you. The next question was the one that referred to paragraph 6.2, and I'll read through it. It said, how was this followed in the instance of KPMG South Africa's work in the Program Management Office of the IFMS at National Treasury? We have noted the suggestion, certainly in the letter inviting us to meet with SCOPA, that KPMG South Africa received irregular payments in the IFMS project of National Treasury. From our perspective, we do not believe that there is any basis at all for the suggestion that any payment made to KPMG South Africa in that project was irregular. It has never been suggested to KPMG South Africa by any of the officials from National Treasury responsible for the project that any of the work that we've delivered fell short of the required standard, or that we did not deserve any of the payments that we've received. Also, the invoices supporting the invoices and the supporting documents to what we've billed to National Treasury has been subject to inspection and interrogation by the officials in question. So from our perspective, we remain confident that the invoices that we've issued were supported accordingly. The invoices that we've issued were in accordance with the contracts that we've signed. The invoices that we issued were managed in the context of project governance structures agreed to with the client.
And Chairperson, I will reiterate just the last question that was asked around why should SCOPA have confidence in us. I've already mentioned that we work in a highly regulated profession, and this is important to us to comply to any regulations and to ensure that we cooperate with any such regulations, which we have been in conversation with our regulator and have committed to complying with any investigation. It's also important to reiterate that we do employ 3,400 professionals who serve the organization, and they serve the organization with distinction. In this case, we have had a few of our people erring. We acknowledge that, and we would like to assure you that we will continue to take strong action to be accountable for those failings that we've identified. And in that vein, we also support an independent inquiry to be established to ensure that if there's any further action that requires to be taken, we take that and open ourselves up to that scrutiny, because we believe it's important to rebuild public trust and to ensure that you as a recipient of our services can be rest assured that we will correct where we make mistakes, and that the majority of our people are really out there doing good work for the government and its institutions. Thank you.
Right. You are done with presentation from your side. Okay. Thanks very much. Ross?
Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you for the comprehensive reports in writing. I think that would assist us a lot, and thank you to you, Chairperson, for posing those questions in advance. It makes my job much easier. But first of all, I'd just like to, ma'am, to give you an idea why we are at SCOPA are so interested to talk to you. Primarily, we are the committee fighting corruption, and we look at all issues with regards to corruption, but we also look at issues to improve the quality of financial management in departments, and specifically in the state-owned entities. And we understand today that KPMG is definitely not regulated by SCOPA. We appreciate you coming here, and we appreciate the openness and also your answering of the questions in writing. But however, we need to also ask you some questions in regard to this. I know that the regulator and the Auditor General will know that you are being regulated by SAICA and by IRBA, and that there is currently investigations, if I understand, from those two institutions regarding that. And we'll ask you some questions on that. But just in terms of the bigger picture, you have to play a substantive role in the financial management and security of state institutions through auditing, forensic investigation, asset management, and review. But I would like to ask you, ma'am, you are not an auditor by profession, and I think it's quite a daunting task that you have. Could you perhaps just define the role of an auditing firm for us just in a very short sentence?
Thank you, Sam. I am not an auditor by profession, and I have been tasked with leading a firm that has different skills in it, and its history and basis is that of auditing. So it's really important that I mention that of the partner group, as well as the staff that I manage, the majority of them are qualified chartered accountants, and they have a responsibility to ensure that they are complying to all the standards that are required of them as chartered accountants as well as registered auditors. So whilst I'm not in the profession myself, I have spent collectively over 7 years working with my colleagues from the profession. I'm ensuring that there is a highly qualified leadership team that comes from an auditing base to ensure that we continue to stay relevant and we continue to ensure our compliance to any auditing standards. And this is why, if I'm flanked by our acting board chairperson, Gary, who's an auditor himself, and Modise, who's introduced himself as a chartered accountant. So that, I don't know if that
No,
is
that's
an
fine.
adequate answer.
Thank you very much. Yes, just in terms of the regulation, I think the audit fees are regulated, but in terms of your consulting role in KPMG, it's mainly unregulated. Do you agree with that? In terms of the fees and in terms of consulting, it's not regulated as strictly in terms of the function that you have as a consultant also to your clients. Advancing business opportunities, perhaps furthering the client's interest. Is it regulated or is it not regulated in terms of the consulting?
In terms of the consulting, the work that is done is really assessed from the basis of the amount of time required and the effort that is required. That's how it's generally calculated. There isn't any fee regulation that I'm aware of. However, we calculate the effort that's required to complete a piece of work.
What percentage of your work is in terms of the consulting appropriate?
Let me clarify the question. Are you wanting to know the...
Yes, I know. You have you have forensic investigations, you have the audit function, and then you have consulting. In terms of consulting, in terms of percentage of the allocation of work from the state and state departments, can you give me an indication as a guide to consulting? Percentage. Just an indication.
Yeah, I can answer the question. Broadly speaking, advisory type of work constitutes almost 40% of our business. You asked the question earlier on about whether is the non-audit services regulated or not. To a large extent, yes. But having said that, KPMG as a firm itself has got its own processes to manage the brand, processes to position the brand in the market. And key to that is the process around risk management processes. And in that regard, we do have engagements within the non-audit services that get selected as part of our QP process.
Yes.
I could have stopped him a little earlier, but my mic was not working because I think he was going off tangent. His boss has said that the fee structure is not regulated. And so the other stuff that was talking to, yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Chair, for your intervention. Yes, you see there's a huge amount of work that you do. It's completely unregulated in terms of fees. And perhaps it's something that the profession should look into. SCOPA, it's not our domain, and we're definitely not, for the record, we're not regulating you. But at the recent events indicating misconduct from KPMG, the committee is extremely concerned with regards to the integrity and appropriateness of KPMG as a service provider to the state. We know that you're dealing with huge amounts in terms of contracts. I just have some information that I received this morning with regards to your, I believe it's your forensic invoicing of about 106 million. Is that an annual amount? That excludes, of course, the audit and tax functions. So we are dealing with huge money and cost to the state, and then we have, unfortunately, different allegations against KPMG's business and a great concern. Now, I'm putting this to you. Is it not the tip of the iceberg that it's only that the SARS KPMG debacle is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of a very small amount, but that there's a systemic problem perhaps in KPMG as to the huge amount of contracts that you have with the state. And as stated in your response to the committee, point 3.2, ma'am, KPMG has entered into 1,301 projects with the state and constitutional institutions last year only, and in the last 3 years it was plus minus 4,000 projects. Now the cost of that to the state is immense, and we as a committee should be equally concerned as to the cost to the state and whether that is managed appropriately. Now, is it a systemic problem, perhaps, that we can encounter this in all projects, or was this only an isolated incident that brought the attention of the public to this? And then I will proceed. We're talking more on the macro now, not specifically on that, on all your projects, which is of huge concern to this committee. Does it present a systemic risk at KPMG that pose a great risk for the state?
So thank you for the question. We are also concerned about that, and that was obviously for us. This is about our work. What we have done is we have checked and we have gone back to the evidence that we have that shows that all our quality performance reviews, we generally have performed the bulk of our work, you talk at a macro level, to the satisfaction of our own international standards. Also, the bulk of our work does get checked by other reviewers from across our network. And in the auditing space, we also have other entities that check. And we are satisfied that we generally do perform within the right levels compared to our peers. You asked the question, is it systemic? We have not found any evidence to show that it is a systemic problem inside the organization. When KPMG International performed the investigation, they did not find any signal of it being a systemic problem. So we're currently managing it.
Was KPMG International reviewing all your work, or were they merely reviewing your SARS report?
So perhaps I should clarify. In this instant, the investigation was for the SARS report, as well as the work that we did for the Oak Bay, a private entity. However, on an annual basis, we do have quality reviews on our work, because the question was around the macro-systemic issues.
No, that's fine. It's just that your response said when KPMG International investigated that they did not find any systemic. Now, for them not to find any systemic issues, it means they must have reviewed almost everything. But if they only dealt with those two, then your response does not as yet talk to his question.
So, Chair, perhaps to clarify, on an annual basis, we do get reviewed.
No, that's fine. Let me revert back to him, because these very two were also part of these annual reviews. And in those annual reviews, they were never picked up until there was an investigation by KPMG International. Continue.
Chair, and perhaps I can come in here to assist with perhaps requests to you, and it's only a request, and I hope that perhaps you will comply with the request. And I'd just like to remind you, we're not your regulator, but considering that KPMG has entered into 3,948 contracts over the last 3 years with the state and constitutional institutions, I wonder if an isolated approach will identify or rectify any systemic issues. And perhaps if we can request schedules from you with regards to lists and details, as far as you can provide to this committee, with regards to contracts entered between KPMG and the state, the current contracts. We would like to have the current contracts. We would like to know, perhaps in the last 3 years, some of the issues that you could identify, and perhaps going forward, the contracts currently tendered for. I have some information with as I've indicated before, of 106 million, but the amount seems to me very limited. Perhaps, in terms of finances, I'm not quite sure, because you've built SARS 23 million, which is about a fifth of this amount. 106, I'm not sure about the amounts that you build, but perhaps if you can give, and you don't have to answer it, I think it's confidential information, but if you would like to do it in writing, we can also accept. But just to guide us in terms of our request, to make sure that there's no looting of the state funds, which is our primary function of SCOPA, to ensure that the public funds paid per invoice is, at least there's value for money, that the expenditure of the state is well spent. I think that's where SCOPA comes in, that we prevent irregular expenditure. In that line, what would you think of these requests and perhaps recommendations from us?
So we are open to compiling that information and submitting it to you in writing in due course.
Thank you, Chair. Then, with regards to the inquiry that you've welcomed, we know about the inquiry from SAICA and IRBA. Are you having any what are you proposing in terms, if you say you would welcome an independent inquiry, and what perhaps is the progress from your side in initiating such an inquiry? Is there any?
So what we propose is an independent inquiry led by a lead figure in the legal fraternity. It is our desire to provide assurance to yourselves and our other clients, as well as the South African public, that the work done by International, as well as any other issues that may arise, will be fully dealt with.
By independent, you mean independent to KPMG management, or you mean independent to SAICA and even the regulatory body?
So with independent, we're implying independent to KPMG and KPMG International, because we've already had that done. ERBA is also continuing with an investigation that they are doing, so we support that.
All right, okay,
Yeah.
that's fine.
Thank you. I believe that in terms of the broader aspect, we've dealt with the questions. But I would just like to go a little bit deeper into perhaps 3 or 2 events. The one is the Vrede Dairy Community Project in the Free State, where KPMG was involved, and where we have a reclassification in terms of the expenditure of Festina. I believe it's a Gupta-linked company. And you perhaps can give us the information that the expenses were reclassified as business operations, which expenses that were used for a wedding, and that KPMG have signed off on that. What would your response be to this?
Well, just firstly to clarify, KPMG is not the auditor to Festina or involved with the Free State Dairy Project. We were the auditor to Linkway, which was an Oak Bay company. So from a KPMG point of view, our interest lies in the audit of Linkway and other Oak Bay companies. Insofar as the expenditure in Linkway, we have noted your question regarding the wedding expenses. You know, this company operated as an events company, and the wedding expenditure that was incurred in that company was reimbursed from another company called Accurate Investments, a Dubai-based company of which we were not the auditor, and that expenditure was incurred in Linkway. So I don't know if I've answered your question fully.
No, you certainly did. But, you know, sometimes when you line up a whole list of companies, it's like shifting the blame from one company to the other and eventually finding an events company. But we'll look into that. I think you've answered my question. Then with regards to the substandard report on the SARS rogue unit investigation, I just have a few questions on that. Ma'am, you do understand that in terms of the rogue unit and the reports, the revised report, that it had huge political and financial and perhaps economic implications for the country, that you've revised the report, or even that the first report was perhaps substandard and did not meet the requirements. It is not only of importance to KPMG, but it's important to the country. And I have to ask these questions in the line of those observations that I'm making. I believe there were 35 people working on the SARS report, and there were a couple of people accused of being aware of the rogue unit, and illegal and unprofessional conduct were alleged. Why were none of these accused ever interviewed by the 35 people in your company working on this report? Were there any interviews? My information is there were never any interrogation, or they were never called to explain. And perhaps if you would could you clarify the different reports and perhaps in terms of the timeline, and why was it revised?
So perhaps just to clarify the first part of the question, the scope of work was that it was a documentary review, so it was looking at actual information that was provided by the client. And in terms of the different reports, we do generally provide draft reports to management in provision of our work. And from time to time, there could be revisions or an ask for the scope to change, which is what happened in this case. So that was the reason why there were different reports submitted.
Just follow up on that, ma'am. Is it possible that you can present us with the briefing notes in terms of the mandate of this, or is it confidential and private to the company, of this reports?
So this is where I mentioned that we actually have contracts with institutions of the state. We would have to converse with SARS and ensure that we're not overstepping any of those mandates.
The report was also partly retracted. Why was the report not retracted in full? Or is it just with regard to the conclusions, the recommendations, and the legal findings that you retracted? Those three issues seems to be the issues that in a letter from your attorneys to SARS, it is not to be considered, which is a very good English word, I believe. But it has major implications in terms of this. And may I ask, who was the legal opinion that you sought, or is that also confidential?
So KPMG International's remit of doing the review and the investigation was looking at processes, our risk procedures, our methodology followed. So they did not redo the actual body of the work. And the recommendation that the recommendations as well as conclusions, that aspect of the report could not be relied upon, were based on the way that risk processes were managed during the conducting of this report. So this is not a review of the actual detail of the report, so we would not be able to comment on withdrawing the whole report.
Was the review initiated by KPMG International, and why was it that the international arm of KPMG intervened into the South African KPMG investigations and reports, specifically on this one?
As an international firm, there is a requirement from time to time for our international partners to provide support on the ground, and KPMG South Africa did request KPMG International to assist, to provide a level of objectivity and to test our work against our own global standards.
Ma'am, I'd just like to know, once the final report was concluded, you did send it.
Just a minute.
May I ask, Chair, or would you like to intervene?
Yeah, no, on the question that you have asked. I thought the question was, well, if that is your response, why did you request KPMG International's assistance on this specific report? If that was your initiative, or was there a body of reports that you requested to be reviewed, or was it just this one? And if it was just this one, on what basis was it lifted out of the many reports that you have done, and more so maybe a year after it was actually presented?
Thank you, Chair. The reason why we asked International was to look at two areas of work that we had done in the recent past that had been reviewed to some extent by the South African firm, and we wanted additional assurance on how the work was done. So it was a request to look at that. We do from time to time ask KPMG International to perform reviews, as I already mentioned.
Why specifically on these two? I think that's the number of the question.
Okay, so the number of the question is specifically these two. And it's specifically because these had become issues that were raised in the public, and we recognize the public interest that they hold. And we wanted to make sure that we can provide clarity and objectivity and openness in how the work was done.
imagine that from your risk management point of view, from probably the very word go, they should have been categorized as high risk and therefore entailed all manner of scrutiny and not go after them as an afterthought. Anyway, continue.
Yes, Chair, it is very interesting to note that I believe the report was sent to the former Minister of Finance just before the budget, in the February budget. Is that correct? To whom was this report sent? You've compiled the report, the first report then implicating the rogue unit, unlawful conduct, and that report went out to Minister of Finance, a former Minister of Finance, just before the budget. Is that correct? Because there was a response in the budget in February. We as politicians knows that, we know that. There was a response from the minister, the former Minister of Finance, Minister Gordon.
I do not
He was
have,
then implicated in the report, if I understand correctly.
I do not have any information around that. I'm happy to check if it was sent from our side. I don't have any information of us sending that report to the former minister.
You don't follow politics perhaps in the budget, that the minister responded to a KPMG report in the budget and that he did not agree with the findings of the report.
I think let's pass that one, because KPMG compiled a report, presented it to SARS. So whatever happened to the report would have happened from the SARS side ordinarily, unless if something extraordinary happened.
Thanks, Chair. You just led me into perhaps the question that I should pose. You've written the letter to SARS on the 15th of September. Have you had any response from SARS for the record on this letter that the legal opinion should no longer be relied on?
We have requested an engagement with SARS in order to discuss it further.
Yes, ma'am. The question is, you've requested it, you've sent them a letter. Was there any response from SARS as to the present date?
To the present date, we have received response around trying to set up the meeting, but we haven't been able to confirm the meeting as yet.
Ma'am, you had no reply from SARS with regards to the legal opinions that you've indicated could not be relied on. It was never questioned by SARS, because this is rather significant. The conclusions, recommendations, perhaps you've nullified with the letter, but there was a legal opinion, and then the legal opinion should not be relied on. And the partner that paid 23 million to your company has not responded in say what has happened with the legal opinion. Why is the legal opinion considered to be inaccurate? You will agree with me, it's a very strange scenario.
So I would not be able to interpret it short of saying that there has been a public response to our letter and our communication initially to SARS. However, we haven't had the opportunity as yet to engage directly with SARS.
Yes, thank you. I will accept that I'm close to completion, sir, Mr. Chairperson. But just to understand the impact of a report that is actually predetermined in the eyes of the public, it is hugely concerning. It is very unethical, and it shows a lack of responsibility from an auditing firm that is held in high regard by the world. And certainly I believe that we would hope that you would also respond to us if there's any help that you can give this committee and the Finance Committee, that my colleague, the Honourable Mania, is also attending to that committee, that you will respond to us in writing. We would appreciate that. And thank you very much for engaging with us. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, as usual, I have quite a lot of things I would like to cover. Thank you to KPMG for coming in today. I appreciate you being here. The style that we approach here is a conversation style, So we'll just go back and forth. You may direct two answers questions. I'm entirely comfortable with that. I understand that you're new in the job, and welcome, and we certainly hope that you do well. First area I want to canvass is KPMG provides a range of services to the state. In fact, let me take one step backwards. One of the main reasons we have you here today is because you are suppliers to the state to the tune of many, many millions, as Mr. Modise advised us. And that's why I believe we have every right to chat to you. Because effectively, especially if you look at the Constitutional Court judgment relating to CPS earlier this year, CPS effectively almost became a functionary of the state, simply because they did so. They were doing work for the state in terms of SASSA payments. So we regard you as a partner. You do a lot of work for various entities and departments, that's agreed. How do you avoid the conflict between player and referee? If you're providing forensic services, consulting services, how do you then also handle audits on behalf of the AG? How do you avoid that?
I think one of the key criteria that we look at is we don't mark our own homework. So where we provide audit services, we're very conscious in terms of IFAC and other regulations that we don't perform other services which give rise to a conflict.
Okay, so you like to avoid conflict. Okay, so let's go into some of the issues at hand here. If you like to avoid conflict, why did you not ask a completely independent body or completely independent firm to review your work done on Linkway and on SARS? Why did you go straight to KPMG International? Was it a case of, let's try and clean this up in-house and see what happens? Because only later you're saying an independent inquiry. Why didn't you start there?
As a global member firm, one of the things that we do have an advantage of is people who are not working directly with us being able to check our work according to the standards and methodologies set by the firm globally. That is a reason why we started there with International.
Do you realize that KPMG International can in no way, shape or form be regarded as an independent body? They are your mother body. How can you regard them as independent in terms of looking at your affairs?
So the request to KPMG International was to conduct a review based on our standards. So the independent inquiry we see as a separate body with a different level of independence. International was doing.
My question was, why didn't you go there in the first place? Why was the first stopgap, let's do it in-house, and then if the public really goes mad and the media gets really crazy on this thing, then we'll, okay, let's have an independent inquiry. Why didn't you start with the independent inquiry?
As I mentioned, that decision was taken previously in the last 3 months. So the detailed reasons of why I cannot be able to provide myself.
If I might just add, URBA had announced its investigation into Linkway specifically, early on. So, we are mindful of that ongoing investigation.
All right, okay, let's go to Linkway. You KPG, the auditing firm of Linkway, it's common cause, the fuss about Linkway. So let's just get into some of the specifics. It was established that there were inquiries about the nature of related party relationships, my apologies, and the commercial substance of significant unusual transactions. Can you please explain what that means to the committee? There are two issues there, party relationships and unusual transactions.
Yeah, so the commentary that we made in our media statement points to the fact that our work in those respects were insufficient. And we've commented on that in our media statement. Insofar as related parties are concerned, that relates to those other parties that could have a connection to the Oak Bay Group. Sorry, your second question?
Well, I want to know what you've used euphemistic language there, unusual practices, related party relationships. Let's dig down into it. What did you see on review that led you to reflect that your initial team had missed that? What was it? What were the specific unusual, tell us what the unusual, significant unusual transactions were.
There were significant transactions within the Oak Bay Group which occurred in the years 2014 onwards, large in amount, capital flows, which, in the opinion of KPMG, when they did the investigation, necessitated more work than we did on those audits. They constituted red flags, one of the red flags that we referred to in the media statement.
Okay, so who at KPMG did the initial work and didn't pick up those red flags? I'm not asking you to name persons. I'd like to know what their position was, because that's important.
So in the conduct of any audit, it's supervised by an engagement partner, an engagement manager and a team. So the primary responsibility sits with that audit team that would have conducted the audit annually.
Okay, are you familiar with the wording of the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act, specifically Section 34?
I'm not, but I am aware of the Act.
Okay, so, well, it's problematic that you don't know the wording because it's quite important. Are you aware of the fact that you have a duty to report criminal activity?
We are.
Okay. So Section 1 of that particular section sets out that you have that duty. Section 2 says that if you don't do it, it's an offence. And then Section 4, G, H, and I set out who is liable to do that. And if you have a look at the sections of the Act, you'll see that your team falls squarely into that group. Okay, your initial team that would have seen these unusual practices. And so my question is was any reporting, and the Act says to a police officer, was any reporting like that done?
We have now fulfilled all of our reporting obligations, yeah.
At the time, was any, I'm asking you a very simple question. At the time, did the team that was dealing with the Linkway issue, did they go to a police officer who they found on the side of the street and said, I have a suspicion, because the Act also says that, it's a suspicion, you don't need proof, a suspicion of that. Did they do that?
They did not, but what I would say is that that was not identified as, at the time, as something qualifying in terms of PRECA.
Okay, you've just told me that you've subsequently done the work that needed to be done, but at the time you didn't think it. Now you've just told me at the time it didn't seem to be necessary. How can you comment on that? How do you know it wasn't necessary at the time?
Based on the work that KPMG has done on that file.
So KPMG raised a whole lot of red flags. Your international guys who came in raised a whole lot of red flags that the local guys didn't see. Okay? And now you're telling me that although KPMG raised the flags, correct, we agree on that. Now you're saying that the local KPMG guys had no obligation to see those flags that should have been raised in the first place.
Yeah, I would say that not all the red flags relate to corrupt practices that qualify in terms of PRECA.
Okay, I'm trying to get to consequence manager. Look, it's quite clear. It's common. It's public record that it didn't happen. Okay, there was no action taken by KPMG employees or managers or whatever the case may be in terms of the PRECA Act, as it's called. So now Section 2 of Section 34.2 says it's an offence. Have KPMG, as part of this wonderful cleanup that you're doing, have you laid any charges against those members because they've committed offence in terms of the law?
Not at this stage, but certainly, you know, the commitment that we have given is that to the extent that we need to, we will.
Okay, you see, now this one, I want to now get into, there's so many things I want to cover, but let's stop here. You have, since this whole thing exploded in the media, cleaned house, and you've moved people on and moved them out. So let's start there. We have a lovely report here from Treasury this morning, which gives us a full list of all the persons that have been been named, and although it has been done in the media, I have no intention of reading out the names. But what I would like to know is what has happened to these persons. Do you have a copy of this? Anyway, it's the list of your chairman of the board, your CEO, chief operating officer. You know who all these people are. So my question is, we see that you've been very generous in terms of wanting to refund SARS for work done, which is interesting. Let's stop there for a second. Are you saying that all the work you did for SARS was absolutely useless? Is that what you're saying?
So we've said to that, the answer to that question has been the international team did not redo the work. So the quality of the actual work itself and the redoing of it hasn't happened. What has happened is checking against our processes, methodologies, and risk management processes. It's not redoing the work that we have done.
No, you're not answering the question. The initial bill to SARS for the rogue unit report, the rogue unit work was 23 million rand, am I right?
Yes, you're right.
So by saying we'll give you a refund, you're saying that entire report was a waste of time. Is that right?
We are acknowledging the significance of getting those recommendations and conclusions incorrect.
Okay, you see, this makes no commercial sense. If I buy a car from you, and maybe that's a bad example, but let's say I buy something from you and 80% of it works, I would say to you, give me a 20%. Why are you giving a total 100% refund? Why are you being so generous?
So as mentioned earlier on, the 80% has not been reviewed in terms of redoing the work and making sure that we can ensure that the work was done to the quality standards in the same way.
Okay. So are you saying that the entire report you did for SARS in terms of that special unit was a complete waste of time and therefore you're not charging for it? Is that what you're saying? In other words, we should set aside all of that work 100%.
What we are saying is that the bulk of the work that was done was completed according to our processes. We don't have, at the moment, information that shows that the work in every single line, in every single report was checked. International didn't manage to do that. However, from a procedural and risk management process...
Just a minute. So are you saying that your KPMG International only reviewed the conclusions, recommendations, and the legal opinion only, and as for the rest, they didn't? Or they did and found them to be correct, except those three elements that are withdrawn?
Just to come in, Chair, thank you. The message that we're sending is that International reviewed our level of compliance against the methodologies we have, policies and processes.
No, wait. What I'm asking is, what is it that they reviewed? Did they review those three parts that they withdrew, or they reviewed the entire report and said, these parts are fine, except for these three, therefore we're withdrawing them?
They reviewed our level of compliance to methodologies in respect of the three parts. The part that was found wanting is the one dealing with the legal opinions, the conclusions, and the recommendations.
Okay, so there were three parts. One was found to defective. So why don't you just refund 1/3? Let me tell you where I'm going here. Your entire approach to this thing smacks of let's buy our way out of this problem. Okay? You're giving a full refund on work done. 23 million rand is a chunk of change. You also, in your report here, on your own version, giving 40 million rand to any charity that fights corruption. Okay? Why are you being so generous about this? Why are you issuing 63 million rands worth of your money out on this whole issue. And that begs the next question, is on the SARS investigation, and I come back to it again, is the entire report worthless? Because effectively what we've been asked to accept here is that we must just disregard that report. And my concern with that, so I've got two issues. You're being extremely generous, and that makes me suspicious. Okay, and then on the other side, you know, I used to do forensic investigations before I got involved in politics, and I know that in a particular job, there are going to be kernels of truth. There's going to be a body of evidence that collated, especially by people in the field, that have some evidentiary material to it. There's some truth to it. And it's very difficult to say, right, it's all rubbish, it's all completely useless. So my question is how much of that report is problematic and how much is actually very, very useful, and why are you giving a full refund on it?
Okay, perhaps just to deal with both aspects. So the part that relates to conclusions and recommendations is the part that KPMG have indicated cannot be relied upon. The part that relates to the factual findings, which basically involved compilation of key findings from a documentary review of more than 850,000 emails, more than 1 million documents, which took place over 6 months, 30 people. So KPMG didn't re-perform that work. What they did do is look at the processes, the controls, KPMG's policies and procedures around how that was compiled. So based on that, they were satisfied there was no reason, in their view, to withdraw that aspect of the report, but certainly as it relates to the conclusions and recommendations, that part was indicated that could not be relied upon. So when we considered the sanction, given the impact of the media statement and the comment we've made in that regard, it was a view of the board and the leadership of our firm that we should refund the full fee, given the impact that that has had.
Okay. All right. Now, this was a little side alley we went down, so let's come back to the main point. The main point was I was making the issue about staff that worked on Linkway, and the same question can be asked is staff that worked on the SARS investigation, on the SARS work, were they, I see that your KPMG International report states that no illegality was picked up by them. And I've pointed out before that they're not exactly independent, but be that as it may. They say that no illegality was picked up. The Act refers to a suspicion of illegality, the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act. So, did any of the people that worked on the SARS investigation, did they take any actions in terms of PRECA?
Repeat that question. Sorry, who took
The
what
people
actions?
that worked on the SARS investigation, when they discovered that, Mr. Hussain, your initial report says that you had all the factual findings and then you did recommendations that there was a rogue unit. That's your original report. That was there.
Correct.
That there was a rogue unit. Subsequently, you said no, that wasn't the case. So, therefore, it follows that the persons who did the work on the initial work must have suspected illegality, because a rogue unit's illegal, right? By its very definition, rogue. Did those persons take any actions in terms of PRECA when they discovered that there was what they suspected to be illegality going on, and which thoughts finally found their way into a final rogue unit report? Was any action taken then? And why not if it wasn't?
Okay, well, I can't confirm that. Mshlami?
We cannot confirm that. However, the reports were given to our client. So I think just to mention that it's important to us that we maintain our role as the service provider, and perhaps the client can assist with some of the detailed questions.
I thought you might say that, so I'm ready for you. Because you see, sorry, I just need to open up the document here. Now, let me, because, you know, you weren't aware of the wording of the Act, and maybe you should go and have a look. 34G, it now lists, you see, it lists all the persons that are responsible, and I can see the way you're thinking that this is just state people. Well, the unfortunate part is it isn't. So let's look at 34G, because I think it'll be useful. So, F, the executive manager of any bank. This is the people that have a duty to report illegal activities. The executive manager of any bank or any financial institution. Any partner in a partnership. Any person who's been appointed as chief executive officer or equivalent officer of any agency, authority, board, etc., and it goes down to company as well. Any person who's responsible for overall management and control of the business of an employer. In other words, all of you. You are specifically named in the Act that there is a duty. So let's come back to the original thrust. What has happened to the persons that have been removed from KPMG? You were so generous with 23 million rand back to SARS, you want to give 40 million rand to, I'm sure Corruption Watch will be quite keen on the 40 million. What packages have been paid to all the people who've decided to leave? And I remind you that you're at Parliament under oath. What packages have been paid? I'm not asking for numbers, but have packages been paid to the persons listed here?
So I would require a level of legal advice because we had an employer-employee relationship with the individuals listed there. So
No, I think his question requires a yes or no. Yes, they were given packages, or no, they were just fired.
Let me assist you. This matter broke, and very, very quickly KPMG responded and said the following persons, and you listed them in the media, have exited the company. Now, we all know it was far too quick for disciplinaries to be handled. Far too quick. So, did these people resign on promise of a generous package? And is this just window dressing on behalf of KPMG?
Right, if I might answer, severance packages were paid to certain of the 9 partners who left the firm, and that was in the interest of speed, to actually enable us to move on and exit the partners concerned, and allow the new leadership team to take office.
So is KPMG really just window dressing? You're removing those persons who are effectively the fall guys, putting a new lot in place. This is damage control, and that's why you're being so generous with the 40 million and the 23 million.
So I do not believe so, and partly why we are calling for an independent inquiry is to actually establish any other facts or evidence so that our reparation is appropriate. And that amount that we are suggesting to pay back will also be managed in the way that it will be of help to our community. So to us, we take it as a start of a process around reparations, but we'll be guided by the findings of the inquiry.
Okay, you know, the thing is, I have no problem. You will spend your money as you wish. It's not state money. My problem is that I think you're misleading the public. You're saying that these persons have exited KPMG. There was no mention in the media reports that they have left KPMG on resignation and payment of a severance package. So in other words, the impression you're creating is that they've been fired. They've been removed. There's been some sort of consequence for their actions. And then, on confirmation this morning, nobody at your firm took any action in terms of the PRECA Act, and you have taken no action against those persons in terms of the fact that they've committed an offence by not taking action in terms of the PRIC Act. So what you've done is you've moved a whole lot of people, you've paid them a whole lot of money. I'm not going to ask you how much you paid them because that's your business. And you've taken no criminal action against anybody who has contravened the law. Do you understand how the South African public might just think that you are just window dressing this whole thing?
Yeah, I think we certainly take our reporting responsibilities very seriously as a firm. I think the new leadership team has been in place a couple of weeks, and I think we'd like to revert back to the committee on that.
Oh, okay. Maybe repeat yourself there. Let me allow you, because I thought you are not responding to his question, which is about the fact that all you are doing is damage control. The people who messed up, so to speak, you wanted them off the stage as quickly as possible so that we can all focus on this recovery and reparation process without really having engaged those people to find out exactly what happened, who did what, why, with whom, and what connections, networks, so that when you take action against them, it is on the basis that you have a body of evidence against each one of them.
Chair, if I may, it is really important for this committee to hear that we actually are committed to continuing to take the appropriate actions. There were different treatments to the different individuals who resigned. There are, however, areas that we would continue to work on. For example, part of the inquiry is to ensure that where there are issues such as the ones that you've raised, we actually act and we take full responsibility for that. Just to say to what my colleague has just mentioned, it has been 2.5 weeks since the international report was released. We are doing everything possible to ensure that that we stay accountable and individuals are accountable. So what we ask for is to be given a chance to act on these issues that have subsequently been raised and to take appropriate action.
Okay, Ms. Glomar, thank you very much. You know, you misunderstand. I fully get what you're doing. You know, KPMG have taken a big hit, and I understand that it's damage control. But you said earlier on that you want to provide this, you used the words, I would like to provide the committee with the comfort that we're doing something. Let me tell you what provides me with comfort. When I see people being taken away in handcuffs, because that's what we don't see in this country. Never. We see executives getting paid handsome handshakes to walk away from their problems. Because, as you said, sir, and you're right, that's the breakdown of our society, because it's quick and it's easy. Now, the bottom line is you have people in your organization that if you go back, you will see that they had suspicion of corrupt activities, suspicion of legal, in both the Linkway matters and the SARS matters, and they didn't raise the flag. That is an offense. And then you need to look at who in your firm was aware that that was not done and didn't chase that up. That will start providing this committee, and I think the South African community, with the real comfort that KPMG want to do the right thing. I think if you want to use that as a starting point, that's where you get. Right, to carry on the SARS matter now, when are we going to get the service level agreement between SARS and KPMG? Because, you know, you went into, and I understand this well because I used to be in the industry, that letter of engagement is important. Because we're finding it very strange at this level that there was a letter of engagement, you did work, came up with a rogue unit report, which suddenly then was, no, that's all wrong, and here's a complete refund. So I'd like to know, we need to know the exact specifics of what the engagement was. The instruction was of SARS from Commissioner Moyani to yourselves in terms of the work that your forensic investigative staff or unit had to do. And let me correct you, that is very much documents that can be given to us. because you were paid. Okay, well, you're not being paid because you're getting a refund, but that is between the state entity and the and KPMG. That's very much within our remit. So when can we get that document? And I believe that my colleagues have been asking for it for a while. When are we going to get that document?
With respect, sir, I believe SCOPA can receive the document from SARS. However, we are willing to respond to that after the session.
Do you have it here?
No,
So you can't tell me the bullet points?
not at this
What
point.
the instructions were, the terms of reference?
Not at this point.
Okay, all right. Then let's move on. Made so many notes here, so let's just go through this. Now, you've told us that you're cooperating with URBA. That's not what URBA says. URBA were here on Tuesday, as far as I know. They had an engagement with finance, and URBA used phrases to the effect of non-cooperative and getting information in bits and pieces. Can
Right,
you
if I might-
respond, please?
If I might respond, there were some discussions with URBA in the initial stages around jurisdiction, around what work papers were within URBA's jurisdiction, but that has now been resolved, and all documents have now, to my understanding, been provided, or in the process of being provided to URBA.
So that was fixed since Tuesday.
Sorry, you could just repeat
Since
that?
Tuesday, that's been fixed.
That has been fixed, yes.
Okay, thank you.
No, wait. Since Tuesday, were they fixed yesterday?
No,
Because it's Thursday today.
I have to correct that. We had a meeting with the CEO of URBA about a week ago, and some of these issues were raised. And since then, we've been working to ensure that all the documentations that were outstanding were submitted.
Right, but what he's saying is that on Tuesday, just a day before yesterday, when they were in Parliament, they still said you are not cooperating. I think that's the number of his question. Despite those meetings and whatever you say has been corrected, whether after Tuesday or before Tuesday. I think that's the point is made.
Chair, through you, my understanding is that the Linkway review started much earlier on, and there had been a number of conversations in between and documents outstanding. Since we went and had the face-to-face meeting and got an understanding of their requests, we have been clearing that backlog. So.
Well, look, I don't know whether it is possible for you to say, no, everybody is mistaken. It's not true what they're saying. We are cooperating. I think that's all there should be to it. Otherwise, any long explanation does not answer to the fact that a day before yesterday they said KPMG is not cooperating as fully as it should. And I think it is only fair from our side to raise it with you, to say, well, this is what they're saying. Well, we don't know what the truth is.
Well, perhaps just to re-emphasize, there were discussions with URBA around jurisdiction, around certain of the documents that they were seeking to obtain. In our view,
You had problem with certain documents that they needed.
That's right, which we believed at the time didn't fall within the scope of URBA's
Has that
request
changed?
as a regulator.
Has that changed
We've
now?
decided to be pragmatic and provide all documents
So
requested.
initially you were not that pragmatic.
Well, we were concerned about setting a precedent where documents were being requested which were outside the scope of URBA.
Okay, all right, continue.
It's interesting you speak about setting a precedent. On page 4 of your answers, top paragraph, last line, are you with me? Page 4, top of page 4. Last line says, we also believe that we need to take the initiative in supporting reform of our profession as a whole. What's wrong with your profession? And maybe the precedent you're concerned about creating. What was that just a nice little throwaway line in your response here? Or when you say you want to take initiative to bring reform to the industry, what's wrong with it?
Well, I think there are a few things we've suggested on page 3, if I might turn your attention to page 3, where we talk about transparency, the transparency of the profession, and we've suggested producing an integrated report, a transparency report, so that our clients and the public have greater line of sight into what we do regarding quality and risk, and various aspects, transformation that affect our firm and the profession. Yeah, I don't have much more to add. We've also made suggestions on page 4 around enhancing governance within our firm, where we separate, we appoint an independent board, or certainly members, independent directors onto our board, which would be leading the market in terms of how the firms are currently governed.
Okay, so you talk about transforming the industry as bringing reform to the industry as a whole, I think is the word, yes. Reform of our profession as a whole. And when you took the microphone with alacrity, I thought you were going to give us a whole long list, and you gave us one thing, and it refers to transparency. Are you saying that your profession is murky and opaque, and people don't know what's going on? Because you must understand, we're very concerned. We partner with you and other big auditing firms to help our institutions do their work. Are you telling us that your industry is not transparent? It's very concerning.
Well, certainly, if you take the UK as an example, the regulators and the firms are more transparent in terms of the provision of transparency reports and disclosure of findings on quality reviews, and that's certainly something that takes place in the UK by way of example, and certainly something we support.
What would that transparency entail that they do in the UK that we don't do here?
Sort of making public findings on all quality reviews that take place by a regulator. So you'll find all the firms are subject to documents that are made public around those findings, and the firms, produce transparency reports which talk to, how risk is managed, and certainly in our environment, how we manage issues like transformation in our business and quality in the firm.
Don't you already do that in your annual reports, and don't your findings on state entities appear in the AG reports?
Well, certainly not as a firm as a whole, as it relates to all sectors in which we operate.
Okay, well, I suppose it's to be welcome, but I was just concerned that there was something wrong with the entire industry. Now, that brings me to my next question. At the bottom of page 3, 2.11. It reads as, the affected area piece of work represents a very small proportion of the services that KPMG South Africa has delivered into public and private entities. Okay, and it carries on. Okay, yes, you're right. These are the two issues we've caught you out on. So the question is, have you initiated a review of the work you've, let's say, done in the last 2 years to make sure that these are the only instances? Or are you just hoping that that's the only thing that's wrong?
Firstly, I need to mention that we have actually asked for the review from international, so we were open to admitting if there are any mistakes. Secondly, we are looking at all our risk and quality issues, including client acceptances and continuance procedures, which is where a lot of the red flags were highlighted. So we are actually in the process of doing that, and we believe that the processes that we follow in the main, except for these cases, and if there are any others, we will find out, Sam, but we are looking at that.
That wasn't the question. The question was, are you going to go back 3 years and look at the work that you've done and make sure it was done correctly? Not, are you going to fix your systems now? I get that. I understand you're going to fix your systems. I'm talking about the work that's already been done. And I'm not asking you to go and do it again in terms of that sort of detail, but do you have some sort of review process saying, we had 2 slip through here. Let's go and see if there are any other problems elsewhere.
Yes, we are.
Can you give us an explanation of what you're doing?
We have asked our global colleagues to help just review any areas where we're seeing high risk. I think it was mentioned earlier on that we would be able to identify any high risk engagements. So that's what we're doing.
Those are historical high-risk engagements or future?
We're working with both.
All right. Okay. Right.
I think the import of
Sorry,
this
Chair.
question arises from the fact that the guys that you have exited from the company are not just middle management, you know, the chairman of your board, the CEO, the COO. Now, it raises question about the quality of the work done under their watch. So I think that's why I asked the question the way I did. Continue.
Okay, Chair, I'm pretty much done. I'm sure that my other colleagues will be relieved. But there are certain things that we can't just leave here. The rogue unit report is still a concern. And you know, SCOPA must leave that to our finance colleagues to deal with. But the issue that must be placed on record is that a group of your people conducted a report at SARS and said there's a rogue unit. And now suddenly we're saying there isn't one. Now the truth's got to lie somewhere in between. And I would like to see KPMG being open to SARS and saying we would like to conduct interviews of all the people that worked on that particular report and ask them, why did you believe there's a rogue report, a rogue unit? In order to establish two things. Number one, there either is one, or number two, it's a complete fabrication. And then to see if there's an establishment, a link between that and the engagement instructions. In other words, we have to find out whether this was a stitch-up of the previous Minister of Finance. In plain, simple terms. That whole thing needs to be investigated, and I certainly hope that in your efforts to convince the South African public that you want to give comfort to them, that you are bound by your integrity rules, etc., that you would work with our finance colleagues in exposing what actually happened there. Because it's impossible to believe that there was suddenly a report, now there isn't, and here's your 23 million back. That's extremely suspicious. That's got to be fixed. Then I would like to ask you, please, make sure that some sort of criminal sanction is followed in terms of PRECA and who didn't report to PRECA. When we see that sort of sanction, as opposed to executives walking out with bulging pockets, then you start to give comfort to the citizens of our country, but not before. Chair, that's all from me for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mania? Yeah, I'll give it to you.
Thank you, Chairperson. I mean, I think if I summarized, I simply I'm not convinced by KPMG South Africa's damage control. It's a combination of a mea culpa, which is not convincing, golden handshakes, an internal investigation, and most importantly, it's premised on a few bad apples premise. My hypothesis, and I mean we'll be digging into this in the days and weeks that come, is that there's in fact a systemic problem, or was a systemic problem at KPMG South Africa, and that there's now a question about work that was done in the past 3 years, work that is currently being conducted, and also future work. Because based on KPMG International's findings, we cannot be certain until your independent investigation is complete that in fact the work done by KPMG was not tainted by corruption or illegal activities. And I'm going to come back to this point. Let me start with the SARS rogue unit, which members of the Finance Committee have a special interest in. My first question to you is, what is the name of the partner or senior executive that authorized the extension of the mandate?
The name of the partner was Johan van der Walt.
Thank you. Did KPMG International's investigation reveal that SARS in any way was able to influence KPMG's conclusions, legal opinions, and recommendations?
To our knowledge, that was not established.
Then you have withdrawn certain sections of the report, certain conclusions. I'd like you to, and there's now uncertainty about exactly which conclusions and recommendations have been withdrawn. So I'd like to read you 6 statements, and I'd like you to tell me whether these conclusions could be, to use the terms of your lawyers, whether these conclusions can be relied upon or whether they cannot be relied upon. First, a covert and rogue intelligence unit in contravention of the rule of law was established in SARS. Can that statement be relied upon or can it not be relied upon?
I think we've reported that it cannot be relied upon, as we did not have the legal expertise to form that view.
Thank you. We found no evidence that the Minister of Finance knew about the existence of the unit in SARS. Can that statement be relied upon or can it not be relied upon?
Can be relied upon.
We found no evidence that Gordon was informed about the existence of the unit. Can that statement be relied upon or can it not be relied upon?
That can be relied upon.
The unit engaged in unlawful interception of communication. Can that statement be relied upon or can it not be relied upon?
I can't confirm that, but I'll get counsel on that.
SARS unlawfully engaged in the procurement of intelligence gathering equipment with the necessary interception capability. Can that statement be relied upon or not relied upon?
I can't confirm that either.
It is evident that the installation of the equipment and purchasing thereof was in contraventions of the provisions of the Interception of Communication Act. Can that statement be relied upon or not relied upon?
I can't confirm that either.
So the question then is, these statements are drawn both from the conclusion and from the body of the report. Two things are evident. You are not able to tell this committee what statements can be relied upon, and you're unsure about whether other statements can be relied upon, although you have withdrawn all the conclusions, recommendations, and legal opinions. So on the one hand, you conclude that the unit engaged in unlawful interception of communication. That statement, if indeed you have withdrawn all your recommendations and conclusions and legal opinion, cannot be relied upon. But what can be relied upon is the conclusion in the body of the report, which reads, SARS unlawfully engaged in the procurement of intelligence gathering equipment with the necessary interception capability. So how do you square that equation?
Sorry, just to confirm that last statement, we can't confirm.
So in other words, you can't confirm that conclusions that you have withdrawn are in fact correct or incorrect.
What we said is that we don't have the legal expertise to form many of these conclusions and recommendations, right? And we don't have the evidence to support that, so we are withdrawing that section that relates to the expression of those recommendations in our report.
The problem is that all these statements, save for one, are drawn from broad conclusions that you've made. So you are able to tell the city, this committee, that we found no evidence that the minister knew about the existence of the unit in SARS, but you are not able to confirm that you're finding that the unit engaged in unlawful interception of communication cannot be relied upon. It doesn't appear to me that KPMG South Africa really understands what it's saying or what conclusions it has or has not withdrawn.
So if I may, the initial scope of what we were asked to do was in the body of work, and I think we have mentioned that. We, however, haven't had KPMG International redo the work to be able to satisfy some of the questions that you are asking from a review perspective. So the request would be
Just a minute.
Yeah.
I think the point is making is that selectively there are certain conclusions that you can confirm, but then there are certain conclusions that you can't confirm. And yet all of them are drawn from a body of information that you went through. I actually thought all conclusions have been withdrawn. So I'm surprised that there are those that you say we can rely on, these we can't rely on. I think that is what is leading to his question.
Point, Chair, the point is exactly that. KPMG South Africa claims to have withdrawn the recommendations and findings and legal opinions. I have read 6 statements. Despite KPMG South Africa withdrawing the conclusions and recommendations, they can't confirm that in fact the statements cannot be relied upon.
Or perhaps I should clarify, you know, as we've noted in our
Basic
media statement.
logic.
Yep. To clarify
But be
then,
careful of lawyers.
we have indicated we're withdrawing that section of our report in full.
Can I then ask you, one of the findings in that section, the unit engaged in unlawful interception of communication, can that statement be relied upon or not relied upon?
Perhaps just to reconfirm, we're withdrawing that front section of the report that relates to recommendations and conclusions.
I'll read it again. The unit engaged in unlawful interception of communication, given the fact that you have withdrawn that section, can that statement be relied upon or not relied upon?
What we've said is we don't have the legal expertise to have expressed that opinion.
Then why did you withdraw it?
Because we don't have the legal expertise to actually express that opinion.
So you withdrew it even although you're uncertain about whether it's true?
So perhaps to put it in a different way, we could not own all of the opinions expressed there, as they were legal opinions provided that we cannot own as a firm because we don't have the expertise to do so.
Chair, again, I'm going to move on. KPMG South Africa are unclear about what statement, given, despite withdrawing the conclusions, they are unsure about what conclusions can be relied upon and what conclusions can't be relied upon. That's the first point. The second point is that the section of the report dealing with conclusions, in other words, the unit engaged in unlawful interception of communication, that conclusion has been withdrawn. But in the body of the report, you make exactly the same finding. It is evident that the installation of the equipment, etc., and purchasing thereof was in contravention of the provisions of the Interception of Communication Act. That finding stands. How do you square the two?
The reason why we're asking for an independent inquiry is because the work has not been reperformed. So we, sitting here, cannot be able to answer the detailed questions in that report. And we ask for some time to be able to do that through that process.
given your statement, how then are you able to say with certainty, for example, that we found no evidence that the Minister of Finance knew about the existence of the unit at SARS, or alternatively, we found no evidence that Gordon was informed about the existence of the unit? How are you able to determine then that those statements cannot be relied upon?
To clarify, this was the report coming from the international investigation. So South Africa did not investigate that itself, and we would be open to providing responses formally to you in writing regarding that.
Am I correct that, in fact, when it comes down to it, you're really unsure about what can be relied upon and what can't be relied upon? Is that correct?
What International did was look at the process that was followed, and given the risk processes that we followed and the infringements on that in this particular case, it was difficult to say that we can rely upon that having not followed the processes. So we would like the opportunity to respond to that, to the questions in a bit more detail.
Chair, I'm going to move on from this, but I just want to, in the last instance, confirm. The statement, or the conclusion, a covert and rogue intelligence unit in contravention of the rule of law was established in SARS. You have said that that statement cannot be relied upon. Is that correct?
What we said is that we didn't have the legal expertise to form that opinion.
Is that based on legal advice just passed to you?
No, the legal expertise we had at the time to form that view.
Thank you, Chair. I think I've made the point. They have no idea, frankly, what they're talking about.
Okay.
Chair, let me then move on to another theme. You'll recall that in the Finance Committee on Tuesday, I raised the question about, I beg your pardon, KPMG South Africa's cooperation with URBA. And my colleague has traversed this. But at the end of the day, KPMG International makes a public commitment that KPMG South Africa will fully cooperate with URBA. On URBA's version, KPMG South Africa failed to meet that standard, failed to fully cooperate. The terms used at the time, KPMG South Africa we did not receive the information required. We received the information in bits and pieces, and then we have received more information, bar one or two documents. It suggests to me that in fact, you have not fully cooperated. So my first question to you on this matter is, did Bernard Agulhas, the CEO of URBA, when he appeared before the Finance Committee and when he made the statement that you had failed to fully cooperate, was he lying? That's the first question. The second question is, what documents specifically did you refuse to hand over to URBA, and why did you refuse to do so?
Well, just perhaps to answer your second question first, they related to certain tax compliance work papers that sat in KPMG services, which there was discussion with URBA at the time that information was requested as to whether that fell within the jurisdiction of URBA. And the advice we took from our attorneys was that it didn't fall within their jurisdiction, but we have now agreed to supply it.
Thank you. Did Bernard Agulhas lie to Parliament?
We had a conversation with Mr. Agulhas prior to him appearing here, and he did raise the same concern to us directly. We have committed to cooperate, so Mr. Agulhas has raised the issues with us directly.
So in fact, you agree with Mr. Agulhas, KPMG South Africa failed to fully cooperate with URBA?
There are elements there are documents that were outstanding to URBA. We have since submitted the required information, and I have given him my personal commitment that we will cooperate fully.
But prior to you giving that personal commitment, do you agree with that you failed to fully cooperate?
I would have to check, as Gary has already mentioned, the Word documents that were outstanding.
Advisors would be happy to write another note.
Yeah, in our view, we did cooperate with SARS, with URBA in terms of the documentation they had requested, but as I mentioned earlier, the point of discussion was around jurisdiction over certain work papers.
Thank you. Then let me move on. My final theme, I pointed out, and my colleague pointed out in his presentation, that our concern is that there is in fact a systemic problem at KPMG South Africa, and that until such time as the independent investigation is complete, there is a question mark about whether work conducted by KPMG is of sufficient standard and may not be tainted by corruption or illegal behavior. That being the case, do you not think that it would be appropriate for you to act in the public interest and voluntarily withdraw all your bids on existing work in the public sector and place a moratorium and voluntarily commit to not bidding for any work in the public sector until the independent inquiry has been complete and you can give South Africa the assurance that you are able, that any problems and any systemic issues have been dealt with, and KPMG South Africa is now in a position to provide work of the appropriate standard. Do you not think that that would be in the public interest? Voluntarily, immediately withdraw from all existing bids in the public sector and place a moratorium on yourself not to bid for any more work in the public sector.
So just to be absolutely clear in terms of the evidence that we currently have, we have no evidence that indicate to a systemic risk. However, defensive as that may sound, it's not intended to do that. We are open to considering your suggestion, and we will go and reflect on it. So we will reflect on the suggestion. Thank you.
Maybe if I might just add, just in terms of systemic risk, I think it's also important to point out that KPMG, much like all accounting firms, are subject to annual quality performance reviews, and in our case is led by KPMG International Reviewer annually, which reviews work across audit, tax and advisory services that we provide. In addition, we have annual inspections by URBA, our regulator, and also by the PCAOB, to the extent that some of our clients are governed by the PCAOB. Also like to point out, we auditors to the 5 banks in South Africa, major banks, which are joint audits, which is subject to cross-review processes that take place to ensure the quality of our work on an annual basis. So, and those findings are all in line with, with other firms, and there's no reason to believe from any of those findings that we have systemic risk in our firm.
The point, Chair, is that clearly all those checks and balances have not worked. That's how we've got into the situation that we've got into. I would think that you need to seriously consider my proposal. And if you fail to consider it, I would strongly recommend to the chairperson that this committee considers formally recommending it.
If I might respond, KPMG currently has about 2,500 audit clients. So in this case, the one matter that we've referred to relates to one, or in fact that is no longer a client, but relates to one client out of a population of 2,500. Also important to note that that client was a small client of the firm. I mean, that client represented at its peak 0.02% of our revenue.
So what should we take? What you've just said or what the CEO said earlier in relation to his suggestion?
If I may, Chair, we have given the context of the scale of the issues that have been identified through this two specific client involvement. We are reporting on it. We are opening ourselves up to scrutiny in terms of an independent inquiry. But in terms of context that Gary was providing, the scale of what has been found as evidence of any mistakes and wrongdoing has been on those two.
No, you are repeating what he has said. I've heard that.
Yeah.
I was merely asking whether what he's saying is the definitive response to his proposal, or should we take what you had said earlier?
So Chair, we said we will consider the suggestions that have been made to us. We do believe, however, given the evidence that we have, that there isn't a systemic risk. However, we're willing to consider the suggestion that has been made.
Right.
The Chairperson, because every bid for work in which KPMG South Africa is currently involved, or which you may become involved, pending the outcome of your investigation, every bid process is potentially compromised because presumably the initiators or evaluators of those bid processes cannot be sure that KPMG South Africa has the capacity to deliver work of the required standard.
Perhaps if I might respond,
frankly,
I think
that assurance cannot your assurance is not compelling. What would be compelling is a comprehensive, independent investigation that goes beyond investigating a few bad apples and looks deep into KPMG to identify whether there are systemic risks, and then gives us the assurance that there are no systemic risks at KPMG South Africa.
Yeah, as we've said, KPMG has confirmed that the quality of work on both the Oak Bay and SARS matters didn't meet the high standards of the firm. And as I've indicated, we don't believe there is a systemic risk within the firm, but as we have publicized, we have invited an independent inquiry to confirm those findings. But we're confident that we can demonstrate the fact that we don't have systemic risk.
What make you believe it's not systemic?
For the reasons I've mentioned, we have independent reviews of a lot of work that we do annually.
But those two clients' work was also independently reviewed, was it not? After it was done.
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
I'm saying the work of these two clients that we're talking about was also reviewed through the same process that you're talking about.
Now, these two clients were not independently reviewed. They were reviewed by KPMG.
If I may, this is about the survival as well of this firm. And I think in the opening I did mention that we employ people who are capable. We have made mistake on two accounts, and we will consider the suggestion that has been made. However, we also need to take into consideration the fact that we are a business that's running. We do have a requirement to continue operating. We are asking to be given a chance to complete the independent inquiry. We will take on suggestions that are made in that spirit of trying to uncover the facts and be able to report back in fullness.
All right. No, that's fine. I think the point I was making was it might not be helpful to start from a position that says this thing is not systemic, and yet you say, let's have an independent review. I understand maybe from where you are seated as the leaders of the company, you need to, but I'm just saying, as I started and said, you provide trust, you provide expertise, and when trust is broken, I don't know in business, but in politics, perception is everything, So I think it is in that context that was raised.
I would just like to also point out, I think you won't find any accounting firm across the world that will have audit or tax advisory work that is perfect. And that's why IRBA and other regulators have investigative and disciplinary committees to deal with situations that emerge
Okay.
that shows work of a lower standard
Okay.
that need to be addressed.
All right. Sure.
And you have, I mean, this with respect is not about the survival of your company. That is obviously your interest as a leadership and management team of the company. Our interest is different. This is about the survival of South Africa. And frankly, this country cannot survive as long as we have audit firms that produce the kind of quality of work that you produced. And you, as a company, have to take responsibility for that. You're part of the problem. You need to become part of the solution.
Thank you, sir. And I really do need to state that this is not purely on self-interest. We have apologized. We are committed to fixing this, and we will do everything possible to actually rebuild trust. And we understand part of it is to actually show that we are actually doing the right things.
Okay. All right.
The opportunity, Chair.
All right. Comrade Mente.
Thank you, Chair. Chairperson, just in line with the questions that were asked by Honorable Tim earlier on, I don't know if I couldn't capture it correctly. If SARS has accepted the offer of the 23 million to be refunded, did they accept the offer?
We haven't had the opportunity to discuss that with SARS as yet.
Okay, but you still regard it as a mitigating factor from your side. What if SARS is not accepting the offer?
Pardon, I didn't get the question.
I'm saying you are regarding the 23 million refund as your mitigating factor. And my question then is, what if SARS is not accepting the refund?
We do not see the refund as the only mitigating offer. We would like to engage with SARS. If the refund is not accepted, we have mentioned in our statement that it could be donated to another cause.
Okay, I saw that you would even offer 40 million as a donation to another cause. But we need to be very frank here. We're dealing with the integrity, and we're dealing with reputations of a person or persons that were involved, and their integrity was dented somehow due to your wrong findings. And that then created a situation in the whole country where us, as government, have trusted your office or your firm with audits of the country. And the problem then becomes when your integrity is under question, there is no way that we can sit here and vouch for you to undertake any audit of this government until such time that we are comfortable with what you are telling us. And by now, we're not comfortable with what you're saying. Number one, all these people, even National Treasury Chair, is buying into the explanation that says these people have resigned or left as a consequence of this whole chaos, which is not. And so far, I do not see any consequence that you have undertaken. I do not see anyone. I don't see criminal charges. And what you are explaining right now, let's just take the questions that were asked by the honorable member just spoke now. None of them you can confirm. You can confirm this, you can't confirm that, but you are uncertain about everything. And how is that going to regain your integrity? We are not comfortable with it. But then, Chair, with that, what I would like to ask first, from, if you allow me, from the Auditor General, they have 3 areas of billing. Where is that? The last page of their letter. There's advisory, there's tax, and there's audit. And a huge sum of what is paid to them comes from the advisory column, which is not regulated. And what I would like to know is this kind of amount of money, do we pay the very same amount of money to our Auditor General? Can our Auditor General confirm to receive all these 3 categories of money from government?
Thank you very much, Chair. Honorable Member, you read from a page I did not have. I just want to clarify if I understand exactly what you're after.
Now, what is interesting here, Auditor General, which I would like you to clarify for us, is how the KPMG bills the public sector is that there is money we pay for advisory, there is money that we pay for audits, and then there's money that we pay for tax. There's 3 categories that they bill us with. Do you bill us the same way, and do we pay you the very same money?
Okay, now I'm clear. Thanks very much, Honorable Member. The situation as it works, if you look at all the private audit firms, they've got what is called service lines. The audit service line is the one that is about giving assurance, and then the others, like your advisory and tax, are predominantly providing services to management of an entity. So that's why they've got those 3 service lines, and they are billing whoever they do work for in that context. Coming to us, as a state audit institution, we are only allowed to perform work of an assurance nature. So when we dish out work to any of the private audit firms, we will be billed on the statutory audit services, whereas they sell more than that service also to other clients in the private sector. So in essence, we are not allowed to provide consulting services to the same entities that we audit from an independence point of view, as well as to try and manage the conflict of interest risk. So that's the answer. So whatever it is that they are showing here as having been billed in those 3 categories is also possibly coming from other entities in the state to which they provide those additional services, like tax consulting, like tax compliance, like other consulting type services, for example, roll out of a SAP information technology program, which the client of theirs may not have, but they have the expertise of the people who are able to do that work. I hope I've covered your question.
You covered it very well, but I just want to then get a confirmation. That means what you offer to the state and what you get paid is far less than what the state pays to private firms.
Well, in most instances, if you look at the rate of the audit office, it's largely driven by considerations of recovery of the costs that we incur, from staff to facilities to rental of space to all sorts of other costs that we incur. So our rate per hour tends to be predominantly far less than what you would find in a private audit firm because of the, I guess, the structure of our cost base, as well as the fact that sometimes people accept the fact that if I work for an audit institution, whatever I think I'm worth, the audit institution will only pay me what it believes is an affordable amount from its point of view. Whereas there may be a different logic if you look at other firms in the private sector that might take into account other considerations in determining what has to be paid to people, including the need for them to send their people to win work. Whereas we don't have to win work, the Constitution says we've won all the work up front by giving us the authority to audit local, provincial, and national departments. So effectively, the difference, therefore, would be that we would come in at a rate a lot lesser than the normal rate that they would charge to their other clients because of the cost considerations and the infrastructure that we manage to deliver on our mandate. So in essence, if the private audit firm is doing work for us, we will contract them at our rate rather than at the rate that they normally charge other people.
Thanks, Auditor General. Just lastly, if you can give us a rounded off amount when you audit a metro, because the metros in South Africa, except for Mangaung, are quite big and of more or less the same number of wards. When you audit, let's just say, if you audit a metro like Johannesburg or eThekwini, how much does your firm, how much does AG?
I don't know the rand amount off the top of my head, but the driver of what that cost will be is the rate for the different levels of people who are on the audit, multiplied by the number of hours it will take to vouch for all the things that are reflected in the financial statements. It could be 12 different departments in a metro because of its size. That is responsible for distributing the 22, 25 odd billion rands of expenditure in the budget every year. So I cannot give you an exact figure, but it would be a significant number of people who are put into that environment because others must go and test transactions in the electricity department, in the roads department, in the water department, in the Department of Infrastructure, and other such configurations. If you think about, say, the city of Cape Town, city of Johannesburg, city of Tshwane, or city of Ekurhuleni or eThekwini, they vary in size, but the intricacies and the difficulty of some of the things they get involved with sometimes determine the extent of hours required. So that's the logic that we use, and of course the private audit firms also use the same logic to determine what the rand amount for billing a metro would be. And that principle would apply even to the smallest municipality in the Northern Cape. Its fees will be based largely on the determination of how much time is needed to mitigate the risks from a financial statement audit point of view.
Okay, thank you. But just because on the spreadsheet that were given in terms of the contracts, I think it's coming from the National Treasury, the contracts that the KPMG is doing for the state in terms of municipalities. There is a contract of eThekwini, which started 2016 July. And the current value of the contract is 1.5 billion.
144 million.
I mean, it's 144 million, and the total number of contracts is 167 million. I just want to take that one out. It's outstanding, and it's a huge amount on its own. If you would estimate, Auditor General, if you have a job of auditing this at eThekwini, would you also charge this amount of money? Is it a figure that would actually be the figure that you charge?
As I said earlier on, our responsibilities extend only up to providing audit assurance services, which means we are the principal player as far as eThekwini is concerned when it comes to signing off on their financial statements. What you have on this schedule, which reflects the 144,979,200 for this contract, is a contract for non-assurance services. So the point is, depending on the quantum of those services that have been bought by the eThekwini, this 144,979 is not an indication of anything. It is largely developed as a result of what the average rate that was proposed by the service provider versus the service that has been sought. So I think the question can best be directed then to KPMG, who can assist you with understanding what services are these, for what are they, what is the scope of work, for how long, and all of that, and those type of issues of the rate. Then I think you'll be able to get to the bottom of this, because it's not easy to predetermine a professional service that might go on for 2 years, or it might go on for 6 months. Whereas a statutory audit is normally confined within a regulated period. For example, for local government, we have to sign the financial statements by no later than the end of November, because they've got a June year end. So in that context, we already have a predetermined picture based on our assessment of risk at the beginning of an audit as to how far can we go up to the 30th of November in order to sign financial statements. Whereas you might find this contract is a contract to try and fix something that they thought might be fixed tomorrow, but in reality it might take forever. That's why I'm thinking that you probably would be best placed if you directed your question to KPMG.
Okay.
As a comparison, it will be impossible to compare what a cost of a statutory audit is versus a cost of another consulting service that might go on for significant periods of time.
Okay. Okay.
Thank you, Auditor General. Thanks, Chair. Chair, I was trying to illustrate a need of KPMG within the public sector. There is no need to start off with. If we have an Auditor General that can do all this work far much lesser. And KPMG is a private firm. Any private business is doing business based on profit. And the result of that profit means that whatever they charge the state with, I don't want to say above the line of expenses that the government has, but they would be charging using a method of gaining profit. And with this particular contract of SARS, it's exactly what happened. It's profit-driven. 23 million gets paid. And it's easy for people to break the law. Down the line, after some red flags have been raised, someone discovers that this wasn't supposed to be. But they don't take into consideration that the integrity of the person who was in charge at the time and the persons who were involved in the transaction and in the contract from the commission of the contract, their integrity, all of them, including KPMG, are under question. So this is what profit does. It plays with people's mentalities and feelings. And this is what is happening. I was expecting that we'll get direct answers that so-and-so from SARS commissioned us as KPMG to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But we are told, no, we are not sure who commissioned. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 undertook the contract and they started auditing. And when we established all these faults as KPMG, we opened a criminal case for this one and that one. We fired that one, we fired that one. We took money from that one. None of those things happened. Simply because this is profit-driven. You cannot tap on wrong places when you're dealing with profit. So these people have been allowed to exit freely, and no one else did anything. I want to make another illustration, Chair. On your letter, KPMG 1.4 and 2.5, when you were answering issues in relation to services to SARS and Gupta family-related companies and steps KPMG South Africa has taken in response. I would ask now 2 questions. When did you start auditing firms that are related to the Gupta family? And which entities are those?
We started working for the Guptas in 2002, and when we resigned as auditor in March 2016, there were plus minus 35 entities in the group that we audited.
Did you at any stage get any red flags, either from your junior auditors or from the monitoring method you have in KPMG that was uncomfortable with you to say, or to actually show that there were some irregularities in their audits?
There were a number of red flags identified, both those in the public domain as well as those identified internally. And I think, as we said in our media statement, the team lacked rigor in addressing those red flags, which then resulted in us not resigning earlier and conducting more work.
So you offered more work?
Now, what I'm suggesting, as we said in our media statement, the team lacked professional skepticism, which should have been increased based on the red flags that were evident, which should have resulted in more work being done in those audits.
So you do confirm that there were red flag raised?
Yes, as is indicated in the media statement, there were a number of red flags identified in the period of our relationship until we resigned as auditor.
You resigned as auditors from all 35 entities?
Yes, we resigned in March 2016 from the entire group.
What were the reasons of your resignation?
The reasons were that was an evaluation of all the red flags that had accumulated over a period of time, which led us to believe that our association with that group was such that didn't fit our risk profile.
Were there any criminal elements within the red flags, and did you alert the law enforcement?
Yes, we have met all of our reporting obligations.
In particular to law enforcement?
In terms of PRECA, yes.
But that was subsequent. In fact, we have not even probed the subsequent, because hitherto or before that was not done. I think he conceded to that when he was being questioned by Comrade Brataseth.
Are you able to provide us with criminal cases or criminal case numbers that you have reported?
To the extent that we need to pursue criminal action, we certainly will. And as we stated in our media statement, our firm does not subscribe to, subscribe to corruption or any illegal activities. We stand very strongly behind that, and to the extent that we need to fulfill any reporting obligations, we
No,
will.
that's fine. So essentially, you have not done that yet. You have not done anything. There is no criminal case opened. Continue.
This is now a second area where you are failing. Red flags every time they get raised to you, but you are very much hesitant to inform law enforcement. And you also are very much hesitant to recoup. Because when you are auditing, like the Auditor General, they will alert us that it's 1 billion fruitless and wasteful expenditure due to social development, national treasury, health, basic education, and we know why, and we know who to target. But your story, as you're saying, is also in the public domain. It doesn't have facts. Anything that is in the public domain is just a speculation. Can you be in a position to give us facts? Because if some of those red flags that were raised, they have anything to do with the public purse, then it's our business. And that money has to come back. Now, can you be able to give us all the red flags that you have uplifted from the audits of the Gupta family?
As we've said, there were several red flags, and many of them were related to what is in the public domain. And we, when we evaluate a client relationship, we take into account all factors that relate to a client and the reputation of a client. Some of which, in terms of what's in the media, we can't and won't always, sort of know for a fact that it's true or not. But certainly we look at all the information available, including what we find during the course of our audit, tax and advisory relationship with the client, and then decide on the nature of our relationship and in terms of our client acceptance and continuance. In terms of the question you've asked, we're not able to disclose certain of that information in terms of the precary reporting responsibilities that we need to subscribe to.
Another reason why we don't need you. You cannot provide us, the people in charge of the public purse. This is the tax money, it's people's money. They need houses, they need to send children to school, so there is money that you know of which has been spent irregular. There is transactions that you know of that have been illegal, but you cannot provide that information to us so that we probe further and get whoever is a perpetrator, bring them to book. This is exactly another reason we don't need you. Because if it was Auditor General, he would tell us, this is what we have established, and this is the person responsible for this transaction, which is irregular, fruitless and wasteful expenditure, or whichever way it is. So which platform can we then utilize to get the information from you?
As I mentioned, we've confirmed earlier that we've met all of our reporting responsibilities, and the legal advice that we've been given is that we can't give you some of that information in terms of our precary reporting responsibilities.
So in an essence, you are saying the chairperson must apply to the legal people upstairs, and then they can be the only people that are liaising with your legal people in order for you to release the information. Is that what you are saying?
Member Menten, if I may, ma'am, address you. In terms of the timelines of what has happened, so there's work that has been done, and we asked the International to come and perform an investigation, which they have done, which is what is contained in some of the findings. What has been reported on is the evidence that currently exists within the firm. They have responded to that. If there are any other issues that we're not able to see, so any other facts that may lie outside of the firm, we are open to those facts coming through and looking at them. In there, looking at the evidence that exists, they did not find any criminality on the basis of what the evidence that they saw. We are, however, opening ourselves up because it's important for us as well to account and to know exactly what happened if we don't have the full information. And this is why, to us, an independent inquiry is so critical to answering some of those questions. We also are a service provider, ma'am, that is sitting in between the reporting of this committee and the institutions that we've provided a service to. So there are some questions that we will be able to answer, and we are actually happy to consider some of your questions outside of this forum. We'll try and answer as much as we can. We would like to give you information so that you're able to make the right decisions.
Right.
So if we don't have all the information, please allow us to come back to you.
Okay, all right. Okay.
Thank you, ma'am. You know, the nice part about this whole engagement is that we are members of parliament and therefore we are representing the people. So anything that we have to source, any information that we need to obtain, we need to do it under the ambit of parliament. And anything that is done outside has no surety or security of any sort. Right here, this is what the people want to know. If the reason why they cannot get fees, free education in the higher institutions is because of tax evasion, illicit financial flows, and that has to be known here by them now. When we engage outside this house, it becomes a sort of private engagement between me and you. You can give it to me if you want to, you can't if you don't want to. You understand? So me being a member of parliament, and then I have that privilege of getting anything I need because I am here on behalf of the people, and that's what the people want to hear. In respect with your answer, that you are still going to do some investigation and everything with regards to this information. I just want to find out from you, and you're saying that your KPMG International did not find any criminality within these transactions or the contract. It's only the matter of norms and standards that they are querying about. But I want to put it to you that are you aware of the term syndicate? Are you aware of the term syndicate?
I have heard of the term, ma'am.
Do you know what does it mean?
I do have a basic understanding of it. I would appreciate your definition of it.
Now, a syndicate is people about operator, but they will never be found like outrightly 100%. And therefore, KPMG International will never be able to unearth whatever it is the syndicate is operating on. Because also KPMG International is yourself. And once yourself investigate your child, you will never give out everything that you know that will lead to either your child being arrested or your child getting a very serious punishment. You will withhold some of that information. And therefore, the syndicates also operate in the same manner. That will make sure that nobody sees us. And the people that you are pointing at us, that they have exited, might not even be the people that you are looking for, because you did not ask for someone else to come and do a proper private investigation into the business of KPMG, which led to the issues of SARS and KPMG, and you withdrawing the parts of the report. And that part of the report that you withdrew actually encourage all these illicit financial flows that are happening, all this tax evasion that is happening within our country, these billions and billions and billions of rands that even the commission of Thabo Mbeki found. This had an implication on that. It had an implication on South Africa's money leaving the country illegally and cannot be detected simply because your syndicates poked their nose into a business that does not concern them. And I can assure you, the person who commissioned it, commissioned that with the intention to find a solution, but a syndicate blocked it, that no, a solution must not be found because we have people within South Africa that must be allowed to take the money out without being detected. So that's what the syndicate does. And you need to go back and deal with your syndicates at KPMG because we don't need a syndicate in South Africa that is going to milk the money of this country. In actual fact, we do have an Auditor General. And therefore, you doing nothing to your people and giving us answers that are very vague are also a confirmation that we actually, as public institutions with the state-owned entities, do not need private firms. We have an Auditor General that is more capable of doing everything. And if ever this is the attitude we're going to get, that we'll deal with it, we'll deal with that. No, that one was not, actually, we were not sure of what was happening. That's not the performance we're looking for. Thank you, Chair.
All right, thanks. Comrade Kuno. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairperson. Let me go forward a little bit. Thank you, Chairperson, and I'm sorry to come late. I started at a doctor. You know, Chairperson, when I saw KPMG in our program, I was a bit uneasy of being part of the meeting. But I do not regret coming here after listening to the engagements. You see, CEO and your team, I'm not sure if you know that you are in a public platform and Parliament is taken very serious. I'm not sure if you are sure where you are and what you are dealing with exactly. We're dealing with a country that is impoverished, that there are people who are living beyond marginal line in terms of poverty. And we are sitting here trying to make sure that we better their lives. That is why we need women and men of integrity to help us get into the cause. But Chairperson, my first question will be on the Code of Ethics of Accountants. Which of those Code of Ethics are a problem to you as KPMG? Really, you know, since I've been here, Chairperson, from the morning, the manner in which some of the KPMG entourage are answering questions, to me, I find it very arrogant. So if you could just come down to our level and stop being arrogant, let us get into the bottom of this. You are indeed getting a chunk of money from audits from different departments and municipalities and the entities in government. So if we could just come down to our level and stop being arrogant, let us get into the bottom of this. Which of those ethics is very difficult for you to deal with?
Ma'am, if I may just start by apologizing, we have no intention of coming across as disrespectful or arrogant. We have agreed to come here so that we're able to answer the questions in the best way possible. If I may talk about ethics in general in the firm, and then I'll hand over to my colleagues who are CAs who will be able to answer that specific question you posed. We are a firm that has a code of ethics overall that govern all the work that we do, including the audit, the tax, and the advisory work. We have a social and ethics committee at a board level that looks after that responsibility. We also provide our people with training on ethics, on all the ethical related laws to ensure that there is compliance and awareness as well as competence in dealing with ethical issues. So we are actually extremely disappointed and regret being here talking about the ethics of our firm when we do provide all of that training. But I will refer the question around ethics of an accountant to my accounting colleagues.
Thank you, CEO, and thank you to the honorable member. Certainly from our side as accountants or auditors for that matter, there is an expectation that we will act in a particular way, especially coming across information that seems to imply that these individuals with questionable personalities, questionable practices themselves. In our media statement, and the point that was made by the interim chair is that we honestly felt that the teams that were delivering on the engagements in question did not do justice to the considerations around professional skepticism in particular. I mean, the issue around professional skepticism itself is not a legislated requirement per se, but if you bring in the ethical element, you certainly can hold people accountable. And on that base, we cannot sit here and defend the judgment of people that were working on these projects, the ability to interpret the information they came across, and the ability to judge it accordingly. So as such, quite frankly, we are unable to defend that. We have come up with processes as a firm to ensure that people continuously understand what ethics mean relative to what we do as accountants, but at the same time, we've made a point earlier on, given the number of people that work at KPMG, there are instances where we are let down by people, and in this case, it's one of those as well. And we do recognize as the leadership that we need to act, we need to be held accountable as a firm, and we need to do better.
Chairperson, you know the problem, we have a piece of legislation that we work with PFMA as members of parliament. And you'll find that some of the accounting officers expect their subordinates to actually go through the principles of PFMA, which they themselves cannot conform to. And you are doing exactly the same thing. Your ethics are, let me just read them to you so that you understand and you can answer my questions precisely, so that don't generalize my question, because my question is pointed. The revised code of ethics, according to ISPA in 2005, it's integrity. A professional accountant should be straightforward and honest in all professional and business relationships. Objectivity, professional competence and due care, confidentiality, and professional behavior. So from this, I wanted to make it easy for you so that you can just point to me which one of these ethics is a problem to you as KPMG.
In the context of the team that was deployed to deliver work on SARS and other pieces of work that have been contested, due care will be the obvious one.
The problem is not KPMG. What is this thing, SARS? Your withdrawal of the report of SARS. My colleagues have taken us through the work that you are doing with different departments. And as a member of SCOPA, I understand, and I want to align myself with what Honorable Mente has said here earlier on, that my conclusion and summary, Chairperson, would be that you as independent accounting firms, you do jobs with different departments, not to help that particular department, but to make sure that you can milk them forever, and they keep calling you because you tell them what they want to hear, not to deal with the root causes and actually help that department that you are auditing, which is a problem. So when you say it's due care only, I'm really concerned because that is not true. The problem here, it's not only SARS, it's other departments as well that you have audited. Have you sitting there, can you actually stand up and say, in this department, we tried to make a difference and help them, not only taking their money, which is overrated, but we really actually help this particular department?
Thank you, Honorable Member. You've asked us to be honest and straightforward. I sit here as part of the
Ask you
leadership.
to be honest and straightforward. It's according to the ethics that you, as an accountant,
The intention
signed
was to reaffirm the point that you've made, Honorable Member. We sit here as a firm or as the representative of the firm itself, remaining proud of the work that we've done with government and even within the private sector space. We have been involved in projects that seeks to support governance or good governance within the state itself. And without having to go into further details, I want to state on record here that we've responded to service requests like any other service provider. We've been evaluated in terms of the teams, the project plans, the methodologies that we've put together. We've been judged according to that, and certainly our clients in this case, being public sector, have accepted that KPMG has got a value to add. Yes, we've been found wanting on some of the projects, but I want to take the conversation further. In us having to deliver against our promises entailed in the proposals, confined to the legal agreements that we've entered with our clients, we have been managed accordingly. To date, with the exception of SARS, with the exception of what we are talking about here, we are not aware of the significant concerns being raised by certainly our clients in the public sector that says that KPMG, the work that you've done is questionable. Without having to elaborate on the actual pieces of work themselves, I want to make this point, without having to elaborate on that, the pieces of work that we produced follows a particular process, and that process is not only confined to our own offices. That process has got an element of having to engage with the individuals. Ma'am, can I make the point?
No, before you make a point, can we just be specific? The rhetoric is not going to help us.
It is not the rhetoric, ma'am.
Ungandenzi njalo, mina ungazi njalo kum. Cela size kakuhle because ngiyashouta vele, andifuna ukushouta namhlanje. I'm not feeling well. So please, can you, I'm saying to you, we are reading newspapers. I do not want to, you know, one thing that we pride ourselves with as SCOPA, we're not here to come and report on behalf of the media. We deal with the matters as they are. It's not only SARS that had a problem with you. Other departments are coming on board. So I'm asking you, because I'm trying to be objective and try to get into the bottom of your problem. I'm asking you, just give me one example of a department that you can stand there as an accountant and pride yourself in and say, you know, we have turned this department around with our advisors. this department was able to turn around. Don't give me a story. I don't think it's going to help us.
I can mention City of Johannesburg. It's one where we've assisted them to get to a clean audit status. That I can state. But ma'am, there's a point that I wanted to make. The services that we render to our clients is managed in terms of project governance structures. And in terms of those project governance structures, we are held accountable where we are found wanting in terms of the delivery. You've made a point earlier on that the issue is not only confined to SARS, there's other instances where we've been found wanting. Certainly sitting here as being the head of public sector, I'm not aware of those significant concerns that have been raised directly towards KPMG where people are questioning what we've done. I'm not aware of those.
All right. Okay.
Departments that are here, Chairperson, most of these departments here, they are in serious financial and dire needs, and they really want changes and need to be helped. And those are the departments that you are auditing. I'm just trying to follow up on what Honorable Mente was saying earlier on. That's why my question, that's why I asked you the question that I've asked you.
I'm going to repeat the point that has probably been made earlier on.
Wait, don't repeat. We don't have the time to listen to repeats.
Chairperson, I was trying to get the name of, Gary. Gary, I've listened to you earlier on, and you talking about KPMG International. According to you, the only thing that really concerns you is what KPMG International and their standards, or you only want to conform to them, but not to what our standards here, even as a body that is supposed to oversee you, are saying. Can you respond to that?
Yes, as I think our CEO mentioned earlier up front, we operate in a highly regulated profession. So we have many regulators that have oversight of what we do, including URBA, the SARB, the FSB, and many others. And as I mentioned,
but EBA, and I don't want to repeat what my colleagues have said earlier on. According to some of the principles that are there, you did not meet them, but yet you come here and tell us about KPMG International. We're not interested in KPMG International and your principles there. We are interested in what is governing you here in South Africa. You're not getting a business there. We're talking about the public funds that you have utilized, and I think as a person, it was not utilized the way it should be, and you overcharge them. But that's what I'm saying. If you could answer to that exactly, what is your priority exactly?
well, I think just perhaps to answer some aspects of that question, the vast majority of work is done as part of a formal tender process where we need to table our credentials, our skill set, and our fees. So, as my colleague Madisa mentioned, all the work that's typically done is subject to those governance processes, which then require us to be fully accountable for the work that we do.
Chairperson, I agree with my colleagues. And I'm saying that we have our own Auditor General in South Africa. And I think we're doing quite well, and I hope that their office can be expanded to make sure that they can overstretch themselves to all the departments and the municipalities, because I think these private firms are really doing a disservice. And, I've been reading about the problems that KPMG has in Botswana as well. So, that's why we have this problem of illicit or financial flows. And, as you're listening to the way they're responding, you can actually tell that there are people who are here to make sure that Africa as a whole goes down the drain, you know. And it, you know, the problem is that when you go abroad and you tell people that you are from Africa, they think that Africa is this corrupt continent that is not going, you know, it's not neither going there nor there. And it's because of people like you are professionals who, instead of helping us, you are aggravating the situation for your own benefits and for their own use of making sure that your international companies benefit from the produce of South Africa, which I think it's very wrong. And that's what is happening also in mining industry, Chairperson, where you find that our minerals are taken out of Africa into Europe and all other countries outside our precincts, you know, very cheap. You know, we are being defrauded as a continent. People are stealing from us each and every day. And it's, you know, it's sickening. Maybe I don't want to sound like I'm racist, Chairperson, but it's sickening to find that some of our people are even part of that.
Okay.
But Chairperson, I've heard that the people that have been said here that have resigned, they've not really resigned, Chairperson, that they're still in the payroll of KPMG. So somebody, you know, the ethics that we're talking about on the accounting principles, they're not applying that at all, Chairperson. We are taken for a ride, and even this parliament is not taken seriously. I mean, if those questions that they said they will look up to and come back to us in terms of answering those questions, I mean, how can you have people like the chairman of the board, the CEO, you know, these are the key people. It's not only your middle management. These are the key people. If those key people are not there, how then do you expect us, or what's the situation, how is it going to change when you leave Parliament today and go back to KPMG offices? You are really not taking us seriously, and I think they are really taking us for a ride, Chairperson. It's not true, and they must tell us now, is KPMG a company, or are you just operating as a matchbox? You know, there's no, there over people who are really doing the job. They're not there, but you are just there to come and finish what you have started.
Okay.
Milking South Africa.
All right, okay, all right. I think
To ask more on the 23 million or the 40 million that has been changed, that SARS has already paid. I wanted them to respond, Chairperson.
to the question on whether the ex people are actually still in the payroll of KPMG. All right, okay.
Chair, thank you for that. Just to make a quick comment before I respond to that, and a request perhaps through you, Chair, that the questions are confined to what we've been asked to do. We are willing to answer any other question, because there are a lot of things that I guess can be said here, and we're trying to be as honest and helpful as we can be. Again, issues such as how the funds that we get, our revenues are directed, and all of those, we haven't provided that information, and I'm just worried that we may actually interpret, some of the comments may be interpreted incorrectly. So just through you, Chair, to ensure that the questions that we get, we get the opportunity to answer if they are directed at us. Just on the people who have resigned, are they still on the payroll of the company? We have because of their seniority, their partners, we have a 3-month notice period. So they will not be in the employ of the company physically. They are no longer reporting unless they need to come in to provide any information on handover. So we have severe ties with them as far as possible. We do still may require some information from them, and we deal with that as and when. They are definitely no longer in the employ of the company formally. We've announced that. Yeah.
You're saying they're still in the payroll? They're still in the payroll, and they're still playing a part.
So what I'm agreeing to is explaining that we've got a 3-month notice period, and that 3-month notice period meant that because this was announced on the 15th.
No. I think just simplify it. Yes, they are still in our payroll for the next 3 months.
Yeah.
As a notice period.
Yes, but they are not physically doing work in the office unless we request for information.
CEO, Gary spoke about transparency, but he was referring to the international KPMG. But you are, and I don't know if it's part of your being defensive or what. You have a problem with transparency here in South Africa where you are getting your job, but you are transparent internationally. What is the problem?
Ma'am, I would truly, personally like to be as transparent as we can be, and this is why we are opening ourselves up for an additional independent inquiry. And I would like to assure you that as much as we can, except for areas where we constrained by client confidentiality, we will share as much as we can with you. There's already been requests from some of the members to provide information such as schedules of our contracts. We have confirmed that we will go and collate that information and provide it. So as much as we can, we will respond to information that we've got facts on today, sitting here. If we do not have that information, we do ask you to consider us coming back to you in writing.
All right, okay.
And I like you as a person, very young and a woman. I'm proud of you. I'm not fighting you. I'm just saying to you, you've just said now, 2 minutes ago, I'm sorry, this information we cannot provide. That's why I've asked you about transparency. That you can be transparent internationally, but you have a problem of being transparent here in South Africa. We're talking about public funds that are being paid to you, and some of these departments that you are helping to, for their audit outcomes or their financial health are in distress, and we are not getting the value for money as this government. Hence, that's why SCOPA has called you. So I'm asking you, what is your problem of you being transparent to Parliament, but you are transparent to your international partners?
Ma'am, I can confirm that I would truly I'm committing to being transparent to this committee. The reason why we're here, honestly, is to make sure that we can answer your questions directly, and where we can't, we can take the information and go and compile it and report back to you. So we would truly appreciate it if you would be accepting of where we don't have the information immediately, we will commit to coming back to this committee.
All right, okay.
In conclusion, or my conclusion remarks would be that this is really worrying. I'm sitting here today as a public representative elected by the people of South Africa that we are really selling this country. You know, that's why when you go abroad, you find individuals who are really governing this country out there and remote controlling it. And it's because of the flow of information from this country abroad. You will interpret that, you will translate that to them. And which is why AG, I think as a country, we need to do an introspection and actually say, where do we really want to go? If we can be led by international companies who are really taking primary role in dealing with, because finances are your most important thing of government. If you find international partners intruding into our country that way, I think it's a serious concern. A concern that that's why, we can't find ourselves if we're going forward or backwards. We are here, we are on the same path, because there are people out there who are remote controlling us. And Chairperson, it's important that maybe the Auditor General's office is beefed up and making sure that they do the business as they're supposed to be dealing with all the departments. This is it's a bombshell, Chairperson. It's very problematic, and it's a serious concern. We should not have companies like KPMG and all of them, all these accounting firms, or anyone that has international partners doing business here, because they're not even selling information. It's not a problem for them. It's an easy thing. It's an email away, email away. They're just selling it like that. It's not even at a cost. It's very cheap. We are selling our country at a very cheap price. And I think as a country, we need to open our eyes. Thank you very much, Chair.
All right, thanks. Can we, just one or two questions? I want us to round off. AG, I don't have a question for you. Safe to say, Mania? It was just not possible for us to meet KPMG to discuss these issues without, extending an invite to you. Because the very premise of calling KPMG is because of the work it does in the public sector, which relates to finances with which ourselves and yourself, are.
To disturb you, I'm very, very, very sorry. Very, very sorry. I think I'm getting old. The 24 million, is it 24 million or 23? That they charge SARS to do their job. Now they start thinking of trying to help a charity organization. That's the letter that was written by the lawyer, that will give it to a charity organization. Huh? Yes, you have covered that, but all I wanted to say about that, Chairperson, was that how do you take money from government and want to give it to charity organization? Obviously, it's an organization that they're working with. It's a form of trying to take that money back into KPMG. When we have problems of education in South Africa, why can't they take that money back to SARS or to Department of Higher Education or to any university and help that university instead of being philanthropists? What again, they're trying to be, making a good. What about other investigations that they've made that had problems? So what's going to happen to that money? So I'm just saying, if you take money from SARS, why don't you give it back to SARS instead of saying, we'll use this money according to the way we want to use it for? Thanks, Chair.
Okay. All right, as I was saying, so I think, AG, I'll go back to my comrades here for their final conclusions, but I would afford you an opportunity to make some brief comments if you feel it's necessary. All right. Just a few questions. Now start with Ross, and then Tim. You're fine. Okay. All right. Then it will be the two of you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for allowing me to lead the inquiry and also for the positive interaction. Just to make the point in terms of the role that KPMG needs to play in our society and in general in our economy, it is well recognized that you play a vital role in our economy, but equally that we are concerned about the issues with the rogue unit, and it's very unfortunate that we have now a situation where we have a trust deficit, and fortunately you came to us, and I thought that we addressed it, and that there were positive interventions proposed also by my colleague, the Honourable Mayneer, and hopefully that those interventions are taken serious, and that you indicated you'll come back to us, and also that you've indicated that you would like to have a judicial independent inquiry. May I just request, in terms of this individual judicial independent inquiry, that you would consider it to be as transparent as possible, and even perhaps considering, and this was recommendations from the press that we highly rate, that we will also be able perhaps to nominate our chairperson or somebody from Parliament to serve on such an inquiry, to see that we can really address the issue of transparency, and that we, as you could sense today, that we work in the public interest. That is well represented, and I think that's the point I'd like to make in this. In terms of the rogue unit, Chair, very important that we get the memo that you, on your briefing with SARS, the original briefing with SARS, that there should be a memo, there should be documents, and that you commit yourself to supply, please, our committee with those documents as you've indicated in writing, and that would be appreciated. And if you can do it the sooner, we would appreciate that. Memo in your briefing from SARS on your regional mandate, on your regional commitment that you had from SARS on what you intended doing. I think that would be helpful in coming to the crux of the rogue unit. Yes, and then my last remark is just thank you very much for availing yourself. I would like to reiterate also to the AG, we know we're not a regulator, but I believe it was a fruitful and good discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair. I don't want to try your patience, and I will be brief. I just want to revisit the whole question of KPMG South Africa's audit of the Gupta entities, which is really where it appears KPMG South Africa provided the sort of corporate grease to lubricate corruption. Now, you've said that you've complied with all your reporting requirements. I wonder if you could explain to this committee what a reportable irregularity is, what your obligations in terms of reporting reportable irregularities are, and whether indeed KPMG South Africa reported any reportable irregularities to the regulator relating to the audits of the Gupta entities. And if you did, how many reportable irregularities did you report, and in respect of what did you report? So that's the first question. Thank you.
Okay, our responsibility in terms of reporting reportable irregularities is to identify any illegal acts or otherwise during the conduct of our audit, which then need to be reported within a fairly short time frame to our regulators. At the time of doing the Gupta work, there were no RIs identified and reported up until the stage of our resignation in March 2016.
So in your audits of approximately, correct me if I'm wrong, 35 Gupta-related entities over a period of years, you are telling this committee that you reported no reportable irregularities to the regulator. Is that correct?
So as we said, in our conduct of the audit, which resulted in unmodified opinions over those years, there was no evidence suggested as part of the audit process that should occur. But as we said in our media statement, the level of professional skepticism that was exercised in that audit was insufficient and should have resulted in more audit work being done in certain areas.
So in case of the audit of Linkway Trading, where your junior auditor in fact raised the question about certain expenses being claimed as business expenses, no reportable irregularity was forwarded to the regulator. Is that correct?
That is correct, yeah.
Do you think that it would be reasonable for a member of this committee and indeed a member of the public, upon learning that after auditing up to 33 Gupta-related entities over a period of years and reporting no reportable irregularities. In other words, finding no evidence of any unlawful activity, despite the fact that your junior audit partners raised questions about certain expenses being claimed as business expenses. Do you think it's reasonable to conclude that in respect of the audits conducted by KPMG South Africa on the Gupta-related entities, that in fact you turned a blind eye to unlawful activity? Would that be a reasonable conclusion?
Yeah, we would disagree. I think what you said is that the amount of work done was insufficient, and had more work been done, that may have well identified some of the matters that have come to light since then.
Chair, I think that concludes the point, but I think it should be noted that there is an obligation on auditors to provide the regulator with what are called reportable irregularities that identify possible unlawful activity. And in respect of more than 30 entities and audits conducted over a number of years, KPMG, in my view, turned a blind eye in respect of those audits. And that matter, of course, is going to now be investigated by URBA. My second question, which will not be, I don't want to try your patience, Chair, but I just want, finally, the combined brain power, forensic auditors, lawyers, and thankfully, to bring some sanity to a clinical psychologist to try and explain this to me. We have a statement. We found no evidence that the Minister of Finance knew about the existence of the unit in SARS. That statement on your version is a statement that can be relied upon, but was withdrawn because it cannot be relied upon. Another statement, we found no evidence that Gordon was informed about the existence of the unit. That statement on your version can be relied upon, but was withdrawn because it cannot be relied upon. The statement, the unit engaged in unlawful interception of communication, you are unsure. Now, how is it that a statement that you claim here can be relied upon was withdrawn because it cannot be relied upon? Can you answer that question?
Yeah, I think I'd refer back to our media statement where we say that that section of the report should not be relied upon for the reasons given.
Now, how are you sure that one statement can be relied upon and despite giving us or informing us that these matters were actually never specifically examined by KPMG International?
So the focus of the KPMG International Review was primarily around that section of the report that relates to recommendations and conclusions. And as we said in our media statement, that portion was determined not to be relied upon.
So these statements were withdrawn after the investigation or review conducted by KPMG International because they could not be relied upon. But your version here was that they could be relied upon. On what basis did you make that statement? And why are you contradicting the findings of KPMG International?
Yeah, I don't seek to contradict the statement, and I think we stand by the media statement as presented.
Chair, with respect, that's not an answer. I mean, I'm not a forensic, I'm not a forensic, it's going to take a clinical psychologist to work this out.
No, no, what he's saying is you cannot rely on his earlier answer. So he's withdrawing it.
Your statement that we found no evidence that the Minister of Finance knew about the existence of the unit in SARS, and your statement that we found no evidence that Gordon was informed about the existence of the unit. Your statement that those two statements can be relied upon was false. Is that what you're saying?
Perhaps at the time I was unclear whether that was contained in the body of conclusions or that was in the main report. But as I said, we stand by the media statement where that section that relates to conclusions and recommendations should not be relied upon.
Chair, I don't think KPMG South Africa frankly understands what it's saying. That's the only conclusion.
No, I think let's leave it at that. Okay, you have a few questions. Yes, comrade.
No, Chair, just two areas. One, with regards to the 35 institutions that are related to the Guptas, which you have resigned from. If any of those institutions have been having transactions with the state, can you send that information? Because that information now then relates to the taxpayers' money. Unless it's private to private, that is not our business. But if it's their company, you're auditing them on the basis that their company is having transactions and auditing or tenders with the state, that information, we need it. And then secondly, to our Auditor General, I think by now you heard what KPMG is capable of doing and not capable of doing. And my plea to you will be to review your auditors yourself, because you can't audit yourself as an AG. You have to find someone, and KPMG, I believe, audits you. So you'll have to review your relationship with KPMG, because if they do this, we don't need another haircut like they did with SARS, and it will then mess up the whole financial system of South Africa, because our Auditor General in South Africa is the only backup we have in order to achieve good governance. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Some few comments from you, Auditor General.
Thank you very much, Chair. And let me recognize the point that Honorable Mende made just now as a way of correcting the true status. KPMG do not audit us. They audit on our behalf, like all the other 40-odd firms of chartered accountants who are registered as registered auditors. So I think let me just clarify that part. Having done that, Chair, I wanted, as I was listening to the discussion and casting my mind back to discussions that took place at various places during the course of the last 2.5 weeks since the KPMG International report was released. I went back, Chair, and looked for something that I once crossed, which was a report. It's called the Final Report on the Commission of Inquiry into the Affairs of the Master Bond Group and Investor Protection in South Africa. I think this report is very relevant. It was a report presided over by Justice H.C. Nell and was released in April 2001, the financial report on this matter, where the Commission was preoccupied with understanding what were the issues that gave rise to failure of certain entities, including Master Bond in this case, and many others. And Chair, I think it is instructive to maybe also for the members of the committee and all of us to have a look at this report and perhaps pick up from it certain sentiments that were expressed way back then, which make me, after reading it, conclude that we have been here before as a country. I'm going to tell you why I say so. In the introductory part of this report, I will quote directly. The investigation into the Master Bond Group and its associated companies revealed serious deficiencies in the South African supervisory system and in those sections of the Companies Act which were designed to protect investors. It also revealed an astonishing degree of dishonesty, inefficiency, lack of professional integrity, and lack of independence on the part of some of the auditors involved with these companies, unquote. And that is the reason I say we have been here before. Because this was a report that was released in 2001, and it covers periods in the 90s where some of these things were evident in their investigation. And certainly the investigation was wider than just one audit firm. And you'll see in that report, if people cast their minds to not long ago, there were the likes of the Owen Wiggins group of companies that were also part of that setup, the Cape Investment Bank Group, the Super Group of companies, Alpha Bank and Prima Bank and Equity Brokers Clearing, and many others. So this conclusion was a conclusion that was canvassed among a number of entities that were reviewed, which also affected a number of audit firms. Perhaps as a way of illustration, Chair, in the same report I quote, it became apparent that with a few notable exceptions, the auditors involved seemed to believe that in addition to auditing the books of a company, their function was to assist and protect the management of such company as far as possible. They also seemed to believe that the end justifies the means, unquote. Now, this is a record of a commission that canvassed all of these matters on a wide scale, covering major entities, as well as a number of firms of auditors. And they go on to say, Chair, here, among other examples of the specific failures they identified, which attached to what they thought of the work done by the auditors. It ranged from issues like issuing of false certificates in respect of participation bond schemes. It speaks to signing of unqualified reports relating to blatantly false financial statements, failure to comply with the requirements of Section 25 of the Public Accountants and Auditors Act. And this section, Honorable Mania, is the section that's now part of the Accounting Professions Act that prescribes the reporting of reportable irregularities. That was Section 25 then of the Public Accountants and Auditors Act, but now it's a different section in the new Act. It also spoke to issues of, without proper disclosure, changing accounting policies to convert loss situations into profit situations, failure to report relevant after balance sheet date events, failure to perform procedures designed to identify all relevant material events occurring after the balance sheet date and up to the date of the auditor's report. Failure to scrutinize minutes of relevant directors' meetings was also listed as one of those failures. Failure to comply with the disclosure requirements in respect of debentures issued, which is debt in respect of those properties. Failure to establish whether a company had issued debentures when the contrary was recorded in the notes to the financial statements. And lastly, assisting in misleading the receiver of revenue. Now, these are the totality of issues that were identified in the Nel Commission report, that were identified across a number of firms of auditors that operated at that time. And so, Chair, it is in that context that I say we've been here before. And perhaps it may be a good idea to lift some of the issues that were raised in those reports, among others, now when we are looking at the profession in its broader sense. And I think such an exercise cannot be complete without the involvement of IRBA, without the involvement of the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants, without the involvement of the principal players in this space who are the auditors, I think, as well as the involvement of those that need this information to be assessed when it gets reported to the public, because I'm sure we all agree that in modern economies, all members of society are encouraged to save some portion of their earnings in order to invest it in pension funds, in unit trusts, in life insurance policies, and the like. So when these reports, whatever audit reports are issued, there's an element of trust that's built into them in order to protect, among others, the interests of these key categories of people, many of whom are vulnerable. So when you look at all of those infractions that were identified in the master bond report, we back to them 16 years later after that report was tabled in March 2001. And this I say because I've also read the international report of KPMG as an audit office. But perhaps what struck me more in the report, Chair, was when I saw in the very first paragraph in page 1 of the KPMG international report, where I quote, they say, this investigation did find work that fell considerably short of KPMG standards. It's an internal admission. It's an admission by the international body. I think if I use that same reference there, it's almost a case of I know my child is naughty. If you use that scenario of a parent and child. So, Chair, when we saw this as an audit office, just to clarify another matter, we undertook to engage with the leadership of KPMG openly, because this report, unlike what I've just read from the NEL Commission report, has got details of the things that were found. I think this report, quite fairly, has got details of the decisions that were made on the back of some detail that has not surfaced in the report itself. So it caught us off guard because we didn't know exactly in what way two elements for us that we believe are important. And the one element is the whole issue of independence as well as professional competence. Those are the two things that we normally test when we engage the services of any audit firm with a view to contracting work out. And we set out to clarify ourselves those two questions with the local leadership of KPMG, because it was not apparent from this report. One can argue that it is an aberration. Somebody else can come around and say it is indicative of a systemic breakdown in the systems of practice management and risk management of a publicly engaged audit institution. So we didn't know that. We wanted to establish that. But upon engaging with them, it was still also too early in the day. We were not able to know that we will get a comprehensive answer to that question, because we wanted to know, in order for us to continue with the assignments that we have trusted in your hands, is the issue of independence with regards to the partners as well, including the issues of professional competence. Are they still intact? And the leadership of the institution assured us that, yes, indeed, they still believe that those two elements are intact. But while we were doing that, we knew that IRBA and the Institute of Chartered Accountants had committed to conduct certain investigations. And therefore, we decided, from our point of view, therefore, that until such time that the outcomes of those investigations are known, one step we're going to take, instead of allocating work to KPMG over a 2-year period like we do with others, we've decided to reduce that to a 1 year, subject to an outcome of those independent investigations being known to us, which will then lead us to get to the drawing board. So just to clarify that matter, the year that's just passed now, which is the year ending March 2017, all audits that were assigned to all firms had been completed. The next financial year that's coming is the year that will end on March 2018, whose reports will be expected to be delivered by 31 July of the same year, as our cycle operates. So we are hoping, therefore, Chair, that those investigations will be concluded well ahead of the March 2018 financial year, so that whatever the outcome of it is, in terms of those independent investigations, we can be able to react to it in relation to the assignments that we have already assigned them for 1 year, which will be the year that's coming up the line. So we are waiting for that then, Chair, as well. And hence for us, I think it's important for both the Institute of Chartered Accountants and the Independent Regulatory Board of Auditors investigations to be given absolute priority, because it will be very difficult for us to enter the period ending March 2018 while we still are unsure as to what the sustainable answer going forward is going to be. So those two things, Chair, I thought I'll use this opportunity to reflect on them. and to say that we took this decision having carefully thought through it, and we believe that it won't be serving anybody's purpose if you pulled the plug while you are saying we are waiting for the investigation, because the investigation may surface issues that may be lessons much wider than just the one entity that you looked at. Hence, we thought that from a systemic point of view in relation to the area of governance, which I think is much needed in the country, especially when it comes to oversight of various activities. I think if I look at the statistics that were released by the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants, all of us still have a journey ahead to build strong capacity of auditors and accountants. But we've taken note of this, and we believe that we've taken some appropriate action based on our assessment of this report. And I guess, Chair, last point is that contained in this report, there are many statements which may be of interest to different stakeholders. As a stakeholder in this context who distributes work to people who do it on our behalf, like I repeat, we were looking to assess whether those basic fundamentals of independence and professional competence, as well as the assessment as to whether this is indicative of a systemic breakdown in the normal practice management controls. Until that is answered, the stance that we have taken on our side as an audit office shall remain one that says that we give you less than what we would have given you in relation to others, but please come back and let us know what is the outcome of the independent investigation. Because clearly, Chair, from what you also have discussed in the committee, there are seemingly two areas that this report had focused on, but the practice management disciplines within a broad audit environment go far deeper than issues that have been highlighted in this report from a professional competence point of view. So we are not dismissing anything here, but we say we picked one element of this report that we thought would immediately generate a response from our side. So we'll stay in touch then, Chair, with them as well as with yourselves to appraise you of what outcome has emerged from that process. Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks very much, Auditor General. Ms. Lomo, we want to thank you very much with your team for having made time to come and discuss these matters with us. We had always looked at them from a distance, the distance of our friends from the media who are here, who have been relaying information to us. But today, at least, we're able to sit face to face with you. And I'm sure all of us came here with our own views and sense. Now, it all depends whether at the end of this session, there's a paradigm shift or what. I want to say just a few things. One, would really want to encourage you to cooperate with whatever investigations are being done, because the moment there are glitches, it just reinforces or creates a sense that, you know, you are not interested or there is something to hide. So perception is everything. And the independent investigator that you want to appoint, it will be very much important for the public to know your time frames, because that also assists in building public confidence that indeed you are seeking to have these things addressed. And indeed, the question of, you know, maybe at this point a not so aggressive tendering for public work whilst you want to clean yourself, I think might be a very important consideration to make, so that once you are cleared and cleaned, you are able to come back and waive that certificate and say, you know what, we have been found to be okay. So, but once you still have these things hanging around you, I think it does create some bit of problem, and it creates a sense that it's business as usual, and yet it simply and certainly cannot. And I must say that in preparation for this meeting, we had very heated discussions within the committee about today. And part of it was, is KPMG an isolated case, or are we dealing with generally an industry that requires, you know, more policing than we're doing? Because we have, and I'm sure you had part of the line of questioning around consulting work. We have a heavy dose of skepticism when it comes to consulting work done by firms within government, because we believe this element around profit motive does mess up a lot of things. And once or twice we do come across instances where you find that a company goes in and creates conditions to perpetuate itself rather than going in to address a problem in order to enhance you know, the management of institutions. So the question was, is it just KPMG, or should we look at everybody else? You know, everybody is also investigating your colleagues in Deloitte. And there are a whole range of others. You know, where the SABC, you go to SAA, you have Ernst & Young. Even the documents that we have, they are all marked Ernst & Young. It's almost as if they were prepared at their offices. Almost all of them, Ernst & Young, Ernst & Young, Ernst & Young, Ernst & Young. And yet, the other time we sat with SAA, they had terminated as Ernst & Young because 17 million later, there was no sign of any substantive work that they've done. But lo and behold, this year, we found Ernst & Young is back. So there was therefore that question, and I think what the Auditor General had read, the 2001 report, brings back those questions. You know, so I think that just understand it in that context, that we're not just focusing on KPMG, and of course the one question that we did not deal with was the issue around the IFMS, because we came across allegations. Yeah, here's a presentation of the DG on this page, talks about KPMG, and there are 1, 2, 3 findings that relates to irregular payments. That's why I'd included that, and I see your response was just a standard response, you know, because the findings of internal audit was that you were paid two amounts, 2,522,084 rands, as well as 2,200,657 rands 71 cents for work that had not been delivered. You see, so we got this. But we said, okay, because there's an forensic investigation, it's okay. We'll get it later. But then when these other things came up, we felt let's take them up. Now, you know, I have my own views sitting here and listening. I had my own views when I came in here, but after listening to you, I have another view, you know. And it's a view that is not very positive, unfortunately. You see, firstly, if you look at your submission, you did not respond to my question about what is the legal ramification, what is the legal implication of a final report? When you give a final report to a client, when you hand it over, what does that mean in legal terms? Can you go back and withdraw it? And for that matter, just take parts of it and leave and say, I've withdrawn it. Now, by making a statement that you have withdrawn it, legally, what does it mean? Does it mean that practically that report then does no longer exist, or the parts that you have, by merely writing, I'm withdrawing it, it is then withdrawn, or what? You see, because for me, more than all these other questions that comrades raised, that was the fundamental question that was ringing in my mind. Because if any of the reports that you're doing then gets withdrawn like that, what does it mean? Where does it leave us? What do we do? And unfortunately, I don't think that we saw that element as the most critical part, because that is what actually, for me, created the alarm bells. That if KPMG is doing so much work and they wake up one day and withdraw a report, what does it mean? Where does it leave us? You know. So you did not talk to that. I read your report. I also read it this morning, and I see we're just stringing along. And you know, one question that I will not ask, it's whether the guys that you have fired, did they agree with the findings? Or did they challenge them? Did they agree that indeed the findings of KPMG International about their substandard work is correct? Or did they challenge it? And thus they could not be disciplined, and so they had to be exited, because then we could have had a much, much wider conversation than what we're having. Now, and I'm saying this very reluctantly, acting chair, because subsequent to that entire thing, then we started to say, let's look at KPMG. And it appears that the issues that we're dealing with here are not isolated. They seem to be in the DNA of the company, almost all around. Comrade Kuno spoke about Botswana. I saw that report where for 3 years, KPMG Botswana gave false audit opinion about a bank. And we've seen reports about a number of instances in a number of jurisdictions where KPMG seem to have issues with ethical conduct. So it's not just an isolated case of South Africa, which leads us to think, well, maybe it is not just those 2 instances. And I'm talking about trust. And trust might not be an objective thing, probably a subjective thing. Feeling. Feeling is subjective, it's an emotion. You know. So I'm saying, so you come here, you talk to us, I hear you, but I'm just saying, you know, in the bigger scheme of things, there are maybe bigger challenges that are probably bigger than you. You may be sitting here as honest people, you want to do your best, but you are battling within a bigger context that does not assist to confirm the line that you're pushing in trying to address these things. And you see, I look at your conduct in the SARS issue. You know, like I said, I don't want to go into that, but I asked a question about your engagement. Fine, you have given SARS a report, it's final. Now somehow you go back, you find that there's something wrong with the report. How do you engage your client? What you do, you issue a press statement to say you are withdrawing, and after you've issued the press statement, then you call SARS to say, let's engage. It sounds cloak and dagger, you know, kind of thing. I think it will be very difficult to justify that. And you say there was agency. You see, that raises question. What was the agency? What created the agency for you to make it public if not that, we might actually be wasting time here. You are actually part of a political football game. All these things you're talking about, that they were things, it's nothing. It's just part of a political game that you're playing. That's why there was some agency to go public. Why? And we see some of the implicated people who had meetings with your international chairperson. Then we ask ourselves, what we know is that the only ones, do they have a bearing on your actions or what? So, so on the one hand, we're saying, please assure us that this thing is not systemic. So if you are doing work, we must be comfortable with it. But on the other hand, it feels like, no, this is all politics. This might just be all politics, trying to do certain things for other reasons. So, but like I said, that's my view, that's my opinion, that's my feeling. When I came in here, I didn't think that. But as we're discussing, I think that's the impression I'll be leaving this hall with. But of course, it might be a combination of factors that are way, way beyond you. But it just says, okay, let's go ahead, let's continue to live, let's continue to work. Let us see how it pans out. But let's always hope for the best, because that's what we want. Let's remain positive. Let's continue to push the positive elements. Let us hope the work that you do, that we engage with, it's okay, it's not contaminated by all these things, so that we can utilize it to assist in strengthening government's management of its finances. I think maybe on the positive note, that is where I would want us to leave it at, to say, let's go ahead, let's do the right things, and let us see where the investigations are going to take us. We, as Parliament, representing the people of this country, could not be passive spectators of an unfolding public scandal. It would be irresponsible of Parliament not to be interested in saying, talk to us, talk to the public. That is why the Portfolio Committee on Mining called the directors of Aurora. So you remember that company bought by one Kulubuse Zuma and two others, which was liquidated and for almost 2 years could not pay the workers. Parliament, as representatives of the people, called those directors, say, the people who represent are suffering because of the things you guys are not doing. Can you explain yourselves? So it was worse with you because you are engaged in the public sector, and the work that you do, we consume it as a committee. So we needed to satisfy ourselves, but also to bring to your attention the fact that it is not only IRBA or SAICA that are concerned, but even ourselves, as the people who use your work, are concerned. So please tighten the screws, clean up the act, so that we can continue to work together where necessary and possible. So I want to thank you very much for having made time and for this engagement. Any information that is outstanding that we may be able to send through, well, let us send it through, and we'll take it up from there. Comrades, thanks very much. I know we're still a bit rusty from the holidays, but thanks very much for making time and actually preparing for this meeting. Thank you very much.